professor Peter Marcos falando, vamos para mais um Assistindo Porcaria. Mas fazendo um questionável da webcam 7, dia 4/3/2025, mas eu copiando uma track da faculdade.
It's a tale as old as time. A married couple struggling to keep up the excitement as the years pass. And after having a child, the need to spice things up gets even more pressing. For some couples, this can mean things like trying out new positions, a little bit of role-play, some toys. This was not the case for one 28-year-old Redditor, who very quickly found himself well beyond his comfort zone. For this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's talk about a couple who had their marriage ruined by turds. It's getting cold outside, and winter is the perfect time to cozy up with a mobile game. The one I'm about to tell you about is available on both your mobile devices and PC. You can keep your progress between these devices as you collect over 800 champions. Lizardmen, elves, orcs, demons, you name it. Let me tell you about some of these champions. You got the HP-based champion Sir Nicholas. He's one of the best champions in the game. He's top tier for most areas. Particularly, he's good for an unkillable team against the Demon Lord clan boss. His skills are based around keeping your team alive. Mom's pipes up and tells her the secret that saved her marriage. Side perspective. But of course, there's some things that you might not want friends and family to be privy to. In which case, Reddit's r/relationship advice might be what you need. Thus, on Friday, November 23rd of 2018, a user named Throwaway Husband account makes the post, "Wife told me she wanted to experiment. I obliged, then she attempted to eat my feces." He begins by saying that he's using a throwaway account because his wife follows his real Reddit account. Which, I mean, something tells me that this situation isn't so common that she would see this and be like, oh, must be some other guy. Especially considering the great amount of detail he winds up going into. He explains that he's been married to his wife for 3 years, and the whole time they've been having pretty vanilla sex. And after they had a kid, things really slowed down. So after having the kid, the wife starts hanging out with this group of moms from the neighborhood, and she expresses these same concerns to her friends. One of the moms pipes up and tells her the secret that saved her marriage. Pegging her husband, which pegging, of course, if you don't know what that is, for some reason I feel like a good chunk of the people who watch this channel for some reason might know what it is. I don't know. But for those of you who don't, it's the act of the woman straps on a makeshift little, I guess a big little, a makeshift wiener. Personally, I never got the appeal of it. I mean, it's not like this thing has nerve endings for the woman to feel good with it. It's just, I guess it's some kind of a power dynamic thing. But it worked for her friend, so she wants to try it. OP, of course, was hesitant to try it. He'd said he'd never done ass play of any kind. And as he puts it, he's always thought of the anus as solely an exit. But, you know, he wants to make his wife happy, so he goes along with it. And surprisingly, it actually works out okay. That next weekend, she pegged me and everything was surprisingly enjoyable. Additionally, the week following the pegging was one of the best weeks we've had together since the birth of our child. We were back to our old sex life, doing things like having sex before work and even waking each other up with head. But then the week after, she wants to peg him again. It seems like he was surprised that this wasn't just a one-time thing, which I mean, come on man, she's gotta replenish her pegging meter. Well, he agrees to it, and this time, things get a little bit more intense. This is when things took an extreme turn. During the second pegging, while my wife was inside of me, she grabbed my hair. I know that there's no indication whether she does, you know, the old hair twist, which you kind of got to do for optimal control. She grabbed my hair, craned my neck to the right, and pressed our foreheads together. I had never seen her take control like this and thought it was very hot until she looked me in the eye and whispered, "I want your shit." I can't help but picture her saying it like the sick animation Red Diamond Dragon Club.
I'm hungry for shit.
He's taken aback by this, so she elaborates. She wants him to shit on her. He pushes her off of him, asks if she's joking, and to which she starts crying. And because of this, he starts to feel bad, thinking he's king-shaming her or something. But in any case, he just wasn't down with this, and he winds up spending the night at a friend's house. Of course, he doesn't explain to the friend why he's staying there. He just needed to crash. Throughout the week that follows, the only conversations he has with his wife are about their kid. After the whole week passes, he finally confronts her about this whole situation. She told me again that she wanted me to shit on her, and that it meant a lot to her. I thought it was sickening, but she claimed this was her deepest, darkest kink. I couldn't understand how and why my shit excited her, but she insisted that she has always wanted this. It was interesting how pegging wasn't really what she wanted, but it wound up being the gateway to her admitting what it was that she really wanted. You have to wonder how many married people there are out there holding on to this kind of deep, dark secret that's only waiting for the thing that's gonna knock it loose and they finally come clean. I mean, actually, there was a comment on this post left by a Redditor who did a little bit of math. They dug into the known data and concluded that 175 hetero couples likely had engaged in coprophagia this past weekend. Poo eating, of course.
And then they eat the poo-poo.
Which, I mean, if you really think about it, though, that number, it sounds about right. In any case, OP does what any Redditor would do when presented with the prospect of shitting on his wife to make her happy. He starts looking up articles and doing research, getting his hands on all the material he possibly can about poop fetishes, looking at some scat so he can understand. And finally, he comes to the conclusion that, although it literally nauseates him, he'll try it to satisfy her. And then later that week, him and his wife are having normal sex. During the session, he mentions that he has to go take a shit, which of course makes her perk up. She gives him some words of encouragement, and although he really doesn't want to do it, he did make a promise. So they go to the bathroom. She got into the bathtub, and I hung my ass over the side of the tub. I started pushing, but unsurprisingly found it very difficult to successfully shit on my wife. I turned my head around to see my wife staring up and smiling at me, waiting for me to finish. With enough time, I was finally able to get a turd to start coming out. I could hear my wife breathing heavier beneath me as my asshole started opening. However, before the turd was able to drop on her chest, I felt a sensation around my asshole. I turned around and saw my wife, the love of my life, the mother of my son, attempting to catch my turd in her mouth as it fell out of my asshole. I was horrified that she would try to do this, and tried to put the shit back into my body so she couldn't receive it in her mouth. Seeing what looked like an attempt by her to eat my shit brought me close to throwing up. So he clenches and tries to keep it from coming out, but in doing that, he winds up cutting a little piece off, and he hears it drop somewhere below him, and he doesn't even look, he just runs out with seeing whatever it is that his wife did with it. He locks himself in their other bathroom and cleans himself up, the whole time thinking about how he's never going to be able to look his wife in the face again. She's knocking on the door and he's ignoring it, and eventually she texts him thanking him for fulfilling her wish and asking him to come to bed, but at the time of writing it, he had not yet gone. I've been sitting in the living room typing this for the last half hour, scared to face my wife. We have plans to take our son to the zoo with another family tomorrow, but I don't think I can look at her after what she did to me. I feel deceived and violated by the woman I love and trust. During our initial conversations about this, there was never a question that my shit would go anywhere other than her chest. She knew how uncomfortable I was with this in the first place, yet she still tried to push the boundary that we had established. He concludes by asking if anyone else had experienced a similar violation of trust, and that he's concerned that this situation could end their marriage. Now, of course, you've got some people who think this whole thing's a troll post. 10 points for a unique troll post. I wish I was trolling. Which, by the way, that was the only other comment this guy ever left. I do think, though, that with the amount of attention this post got, the sort of person who writes troll posts on Reddit wouldn't be able to help themselves but make a bunch of updates. Now, of course, these updates never came. Granted, the mods eventually locked this thread and they added a warning that if OP wants to add updates, he needs to contact them first. So perhaps there actually were updates that he wasn't able to post. In any case, this actually does raise an interesting point. On some level, this is a violation of consent. Like, he was clearly uncomfortable with this act to begin with, and then she went and tried to make it something that he had never agreed to. One user, Indelible Moments, directed him to r/BDSM community for advice from more experienced people in this matter. Although another user, Dinos Are Gay Like Me, noted that even there's not a lot of scat people. Although another user, Moy Fry, brought up a good point. Even then, the core aspects of a scene are the core aspects. She violated his trust and took the scene to a level he wasn't ready for. Having the language to talk to her could be what helps repair their relationship. Perhaps my favorite take in the comments, though, the most Reddit-brained thing that I've read in this entire discussion. This is so fucked. I just don't think I could literally shit in someone's mouth and then ever kiss them again. If you ever had a dog, just consider that a lot of dogs eat their own shit then later proceed to lick your face. Yeah, but hopefully your dog is not the mother of your children and you need to regain a sense of sexual normalcy with said dog. Hopefully. This thread is weird enough already. That's the story of the Redditor whose wife greedily stole his poo. There is a question that the greatest minds of our civilization have contended with for time immemorial, or at least since the 80s or so. That question is, what if you had a video game with boobs in it? Many have tried. You got infamous Atari games like Bachelor Party, Custer's Revenge, and my personal favorite, just for the amazing title, Beat 'em and Eat 'em. I can only imagine how horned up people used to get to these barely coherent blobs that imply boobs. You got those scandalous one-pixel areolas of Soap Panic. That screen in Rings of Power where if you press the right buttons, you see a naked lady. And who can forget fighting game classic Strip Fighter 2, where you can just bash your opponent's skull in using your gigantic boobs. You know, I really need to make a whole other video just on the topic of terrible adult video games. By the time we get to the polygon graphics era though, video game boobs kind of fell off, leaving fans in AOL chat rooms trying to figure out the elusive Tomb Raider nude code once and for all. It was up to developer Z-Access, with the help of publisher Acclaim, to pull us back out of the dark ages and give the people what they want, a game where you ride your bike with your boobs out. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of BMX XXX. BMX XXX is a game where you look back on it and you're like, what planet could anybody, let alone a well-known video game publisher that's been around for decades, think that this was a good idea? I mean, even when it came out, people were thinking this. And yet, there's no other time in human history where such a thing could have ever come into existence. We're talking late 90s, early 2000s, they just had a very special energy to them. A pervasive cultural current that took us to a place that was very much the opposite of the way things are now. An age of blatant offensiveness and vulgarity, which gave way to a renaissance of objectifying women. You're sitting down watching WWF, the most mainstream it had ever been since Hulkamania, and then Sable just dumps him out on live TV, while Jerry Lawler is screaming for puppies. Then you switch over to Comedy Central. The Man Show's on, and between segments of Girls on Trampolines and Jimmy Kimmel in blackface, you get Girls Gone Wild ads where Doug Stanhope is yelling at drunk college girls to show us where babies feed. I think like at least half the cars I'd see around New York at this time would have those Opie and Anthony Whip 'em Out Wednesday stickers on the window. And then, while all this is going on, you've also got the rise of extreme sports. Stuff like skateboarding is transitioning from being perceived as something for misbehaved children like Bart Simpson to a legitimate sport that can be judged and ranked. And perhaps the single biggest moment in the mainstreaming of extreme sports comes on June 27th, 1999 at the 5th X Games. This was the day that Tony Hawk hit the first recorded 900 on a vert ramp with a successful landing. This gets all kinds of mainstream coverage, and grainy real player videos of it are all over the internet. And Tony Hawk is propelled into essentially being the first legitimate mainstream extreme sports star, which makes him the perfect face of the skateboarding game being developed by Neversoft, which of course would become Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I remember it so vividly. My friend gets the game, so I grab a can of Surge, throw on my Jenko Kangaroos, and head over to experience what would be a world-changing game. I mean, sure, there had been other extreme sports games before. PlayStation even came with a demo that included ESPN's X Games, but there was just nothing like this before. It was simple enough that you could just pick it up and go, but at the same time, it was complex enough where you just keep on getting better and better and challenge yourself more and more for hours, days. Just absolutely endless replay value. I don't think I need to tell you this would be one of the most beloved games of all time. And of course, it made money hand over fist, which inspires a wave of similar extreme sports games. And that right there is the seed that would eventually grow into BMX XXX. 2 months after Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is released, Rockstar Games releases Thrasher Presents Skate and Destroy, developed by Z-Axis. This game was a lot more realistic, more simulation-like than Tony Hawk. Your characters and your boards would take damage, and you had to do more involved, realistic movements to perform the tricks. Some people thought this made the game too difficult and a bit tedious, but there are people who prefer this type of skateboarding game, and you would see more of this formula in games like Skate. But it would just not be anywhere near as successful as Tony Hawk. Things were just getting started though. At this time, Sean Rosen, an executive producer for Acclaim, was looking for a company to develop a BMX game. Eventually he would wind up approaching Z-Axis, and what they would do is they would take the stages they already made for Thrasher, and they just made a bike to put into Thrasher stages with a character on and see if it worked. According to an interview with Vice, they did it in like a day and sent the build back to me. I presented it to executives at Acclaim and they loved it, Rosen said. After they had their prototype, they would approach some BMX pros to be the face of the games. They began to work with Ryan Nyquist and of course the late Dave Mira. They both loved the concept and Dave would become extremely involved in the production of the game. He would put together the move lists, do the motion capture, get the sponsors, and he brought in other BMX pros to be in the game that would of course eventually bear his name, Dave Mira Freestyle BMX. Although of course this wasn't as popular as Tony Hawk, it was much more successful from Thrasher and a very well-received game, leading to the release of a second version of Freestyle BMX with extra content, and of course, Dave Mira Freestyle BMX 2. The games are doing well, definitely well enough that Acclaim already announces Dave Mira 3, but it's clear that by now this genre is becoming very, very saturated. Dave Mira 3 was going to have to do something to stand out. And the developers, Z-Axis, had a few ideas. They wanted to add a bit of a story to it, they wanted to add some quests and things like that. It's described in the Vice interview. I'm pretty sure that it was kind of laid out, the player was a part of a BMX team on tour, and we were just stopping along our tour route throughout the states. You know, a lot like the skate videos you've seen for decades now, where they just get in their beat up car, drive, stop at some abandoned amusement park, and go skate. And the people who worked at Z-Axis were all really excited to work on this concept. Not only were they pushing their boundaries of what they could do in a game, but it was a really fresh idea. Mind you, Tony Hawk's Underground was still a few years away, but to Acclaim, this wasn't enough. They needed a little something to create some buzz around the game, so they start brainstorming. You know, when you get a whole bunch of guys in a room, people start throwing out stupid ideas, he told me. What does mature mean? Maybe we'll have some more hardcore music. Maybe there'll be a little bit more language in it. And someone threw out, I don't remember who it was, let's put strippers in the game, and everyone laughed. But after the laughter dies out, people start to talk about this seriously. What if you had strippers in the game? At the time, Acclaim was struggling financially, so they were really desperate to try just about anything to make some money. They wanted to get people talking, and strippers in a bike game would get people talking, and there you go, now we're actually making a BMX game with strippers in it. Sean Rosen goes and strikes a deal with the Scores Strip Club, which is probably best known for being a strip club in New York that Howard Stern liked, and they're going to have some of the girls appear in the game in real unlockable strip videos, set to songs like Click Click Boom and Down by 311. Like, you cannot hammer in more how much this game is a product of its time. It all sounds so absurd, and yet you look at videos of it on YouTube and people seem to have fond memories. My first porno. Sigh. So many memories. Also inspired me to grow up and date strippers. This is why I am obsessed with Asian women, and will always be. What a blessed child I was when I was 12 years old. Of course, though, they had to get Dave Mira on board with this idea. So Sean Rosen flies out to meet with Dave and tell him about the new concept for Dave Mira 3. And surprisingly, Dave Mira loves this idea. Sean describes him as literally rolling on the floor laughing. It's the funniest thing he ever heard of. And thus, the already announced Dave Mira Freestyle BMX 3 becomes Dave Mira BMX XXX. And sure enough, May of that year comes around and people are getting their first looks of Dave Mira BMX XXX, and it's creating all of the buzz that Acclaim had hoped for, with journalists commentating on the groundbreaking boob jiggle technology. The press just can't stop talking about this game. But then there's a problem. You see, Dave Mira loved this concept. Dave Mira's sponsors, not so much. So it was decided that Dave would not appear in this game unless all of the sexual and otherwise offensive content was removed. But Acclaim so strongly believed that their BMX game with boobs was going to be the big success that they've been waiting for, that they decided they wanted complete control of this game. And thus, in August of 2002, it's announced that Dave Mirra and all of the BMX pros would be removed from the game, which is now simply titled BMX XXX. And instead they would have Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX 3 on Game Boy Advance, which was released the same month as BMX XXX to much less controversy. So they already had to retool this game once to add strippers and side characters like the Pimp, the Wiener King, and a Chinese grocer named Long Hung Kok.
Motherfucker! What the fuck happened to my ride? No shit, they shitting on it. I ain't blind. I wanna know what we gonna be doing about it. Ah, my man! That's what I like about you, Cock. You's one smart motherfucker. My man Cock here is asking you to get all up in there and chase those diarrhea heaven motherfuckers off the wire.
I can't believe they actually wrote out Axe. So now they had to go in and replace all of the real life bikers with made up characters. But it also gives them an opportunity to add a little something more, you know. Now if you're really good at the game, you can see their boobs. So despite this hurdle, they keep on working on the game. Acclaim starts dumping massive amounts of money into marketing for this game, because you know, it's gonna be a big hit. They have their whole ad campaign with the Keep It Dirty and the This Is BMX, and they even have a contest on their website where one lucky woman will be crowned Miss BMX XXX. This is just the most representative collection of women from 2002 I've ever seen. I'm not sure which of these ladies won, but whoever did, they were treated to a trip to the actual Score strip club, accompanied by none other than Baba Booey and Casey Armstrong. And then another unforeseen wrench gets thrown into the works. In October, a mere month before the game's release, Toys R Us, Walmart, and KB Toys announced that they will not be carrying the game, which back then is a big deal. You had something like 25% of people who got all of their games from Walmart. And in some parts of the country, these places were pretty much the only place you could buy a game. When that happens, Acclaim responds with a point that's actually pretty valid. We believe that there is a general unfair characterization of the interactive entertainment industry, and as a result, our product is being held to an entirely different standard than other entertainment media with comparable content, including movies, television, and radio, said Greg Fishbach, the CEO of Acclaim. While we acknowledge that we are setting new benchmarks with BMX XXX, we are disappointed there are groups who fail to see how this humorous product is truly on par with such widely accepted mainstream entertainment experiences, including movies like American Pie, TV shows like The Sopranos and Sex and the City. As a leading publisher, we fully believe that consumers should have a right to choose their entertainment, and with that right comes the importance of responsible consumerism. This product was not designed for, nor is it being marketed to consumers under the age of 17. Of course, as valid as it is for the CEO to point out this hypocrisy, it changes nothing, and it also gets banned in Australia pending the removal of the adult content. And also, Sony wants it censored. Although weirdly, Nintendo of all companies was okay with it being uncensored on the GameCube. In any case, it's clear this ship is sinking. People involved are using fake names in the credits lest this game tarnish their entire career. And of course, it releases to absolute critical and commercial failure. A few months later, Dave Mirra would sue Acclaim for $20 million, alleging that this game damaged his reputation. He claimed that BMX XXX was pitched to him as more of a spoof movie like Airplane or something, but all his sexual stuff got added after he'd already signed the contract. Which does seem to contradict what Rosen said in the Vice interview, and sure enough, the lawsuit would be dropped shortly after, with Dave Mirra's contract with Acclaim continuing to 2011 as originally planned. Of course, Acclaim itself wouldn't last to 2011, filing for bankruptcy in 2004. One of the factors in this bankruptcy being the failure of BMX XXX. More specifically, the fact that they did not disclose to shareholders that they were working on a game with adult content that might get them locked out of retailers. This was brought up in a different lawsuit that was made by investors. After Acclaim went under, the Dave Mirra license would be picked up by Crave Entertainment, who would release Dave Mirra BMX Challenge, a game that actually received even worse reviews than BMX XXX. And unfortunately, the last title in the series, as in 2016, Dave would take his own life. To this day, there are some people who maintain that there is a good game buried within BMX XXX, although many more who would disagree. But the sad thing though, I can't help but think they could have avoided all of the problems that led to the downfall of this game. They could have had something here, and they could have avoided all of the problems they had with the release if they had only went half as far as they did. You know, like as it is, it almost feels like all the content in this game It's almost like a fake game from a movie that takes place in 2002 where they're parodying the culture of the era. But no, it's just a real thing that existed. They might have gotten somewhere if they played ball a little bit. I mean, it was ahead of its time to have this kind of story built into this kind of game. And you could have gotten away with this GTA-style humor then. It's not even that the game was too edgy, it's that the game was edgy in ways that didn't make sense. Like, did you really need a licensing deal with a specific strip club in New York that nobody really cares about? Like, the most you're gonna get out of that, if someone listened to Howard Stern, they'd be like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. Like, did you really think the big scores deal was gonna sell even a single copy of this game? Oh yeah, let's have them ride their bikes with their boobs out. That'll put asses in seats. Really, they should just made the whole game about the pimp and the racist Chinese guy. Ultimately, the whole thing winds up being such a disgrace that Chillin' Rosen leaves the video game industry entirely, instead opening up a koi pond business. And that's the story of BMX XXX. When you look at this man, Stephen J. Sanderson, at first he gives the impression of a man who might have been typecast as a serial killer in a movie. Standing in court, wearing prison coveralls, with a weathered face and a cold look in his eyes, he explains in a calm, matter-of-fact way how and why he killed his cellmate. And these words have had millions brand him as a hero. And every time I see this clip, I'm left wondering what's this guy's whole story. Let's take a look at Stephen J. Sanderson, the inmate who killed a child abuser. Ted Dyer was convicted in early 2014 for abusing a 9-year-old. He was ordered to serve 25 to 50 years at the Saginaw Correctional Facility. It was in those first 10 months that he shared a cell with Stephen J. Sanderson. Stephen was in there for life and had no possibility of parole. The trouble began once he discovered the nature of Ted's crimes. He staged a confrontation on October 29th demanding the nonce to leave. Instead, Ted began describing the events in detail. This enraged Stephen to the point that he strangled the 67-9-year-old man to death, and his body was discovered later that day. Needless to say, there wasn't much sympathy for Ted. His death was met by cheers from the local community, celebrating the fact that there's one less monster walking the earth. Ted's victim's mother responded with a mixture of tears and laughter. Her daughter could finally feel safe. Stephen was formally charged for the attack in December. 2 months later, he pled guilty to second-degree homicide. It was a speedy process due in large part to his stunning level of transparency. While many correctly assumed his motive, they were still fascinated by the inmate's explanation. That's because the man was remarkably blunt.
Well, if it's all right, I'd like to tell you where it started.
Go ahead.
All right, well, he was my bunkie, and I had found out that he was in prison for child molestation, a really bad case. So that night he was trying to justify why he did it, and I just told him to be quiet, and he would have to leave in the morning to find a new cell. But he continued to talk about it and try to justify it, so he was a little bit bigger than me, so I got down and I hit him in his face a few times, and when he fell, I wrapped a cord around his neck and I took his life.
This footage made its way to YouTube where it amassed 22 million views. He became a viral sensation as people hailed him as a hero, and this intensified after the release of his interrogation in April. The first excerpt elaborates on his rationale and his thoughts in the aftermath. He shows no remorse and says Ted got what he deserved.
I mean, you know, obviously I don't think right. I'm in prison for most of my life, so my thinking isn't really rational. I don't know, I just kind of...
Thought that that was the appropriate thing to do at that time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. I know murdering somebody's not a good thing, but I mean, Jesus, man, if there's the things this guy did, things he said he did, I do what's necessary. I do what some people won't. I mean, you guys are cops. You arrest people all the time for stuff that you wish you could shoot them in the face. I already know that. I'm not stupid. You know, I mean,
I understand.
There's crimes that shouldn't be committed. So, you know, I just have, I don't know, I just don't have any empathy for people.
So basically, what you did, you figure Ted got what he deserved.
Ted got what he deserved. I believe that with all my heart.
The next clip has Stephen describe the actual altercation.
All right, I guess he decided to clear his conscience or something, but, you know, he told me what he was in prison for, that he had, you know, was accused of being an 11-year-old girl, and he got 25 to life for it, and, you know, I told him that's enough, I don't want to hear any more. I first, you know, punched him a couple times, still wouldn't shut up. Still kept telling me he wanted to explain that he didn't do it, that he was being set up and all this stuff, and I don't know, I just got mad, and then I hit him and knocked him out, and then I took the shoelaces out of his shoes, tied them together, wrapped it around his neck, and strangled him. Put him on his bed and covered him up and climbed in my bed and went to sleep.
There is a subtle discrepancy between the two accounts. The timeline here has Ted forcing the subject unprompted, and this subtle change firmly establishes Stephen as a vigilante. The narrative was set once the video reached 17 million views. There was an outpour of fan mail, primarily from women. It was an escape for them as they vented about trauma and fantasized about following in his footsteps. A lot of them expressed a romantic interest in him, and one of them even named their child after him. It got to the point where Stephen acknowledged them during his sentencing, and he took time in court to reject the label of hero.
People think I'm some kind of hero when I'm actually not. I just, did what I thought was best in the time that I was given. I don't know, I've been getting these emails saying that, it's not my position to judge anybody. And I want to make it quite clear that I didn't judge him. I know God is the only judge we have. I've just set the appointment up.
Stephen was sentenced to life on April 22nd, 2015. In spite of this, he can be seen laughing in photos with his attorney James Gust. The lawyer explained that it made no difference. For this term to begin, his client had to die and come back to life. He then vouched for Stephen's character. The inmate had apparently threatened this scenario for months, and he promised to end any cellmate he found out abused children. But this wasn't just a warning to guards. It was also said that the deceased's family could sue for negligence. James reflected that it tells you something about him as a guy. With that said, it's still no surprise that the public continued to venerate Stephen. His confession still goes viral sporadically, with Google Trends showing a resurgence last year. Yet for every supporter he has, there is always someone out there to point out his dark past. If you recall, Stephen had a prior life sentence from 1992. The details resurfaced from an old newspaper. It began while the man was still in prison for larceny. He became pen pals with a 33-year-old named Linda McLean. Linda was struggling financially and lived alone. This fueled her to write to the cellmate of her friend's husband. The two became close and she began to overlook his record. And this was good timing as Stephen was paroled on October 16th. Afterwards, they frequently met up to drink and smoke crack. And this part is where his story starts to deviate from the authorities. It was only a week later that Linda was found suffocated in her bed. He was brought in for questioning and admitted his involvement. However, he said that this was consensual, citing the woman's depression. This claim was disputed by her friends and loved ones. Linda's mother called him a vicious convict and believed that he only said this in order to get a lesser sentence. And if that's true, it didn't turn out the way he wanted, as he wound up being charged with first-degree murder. By some accounts, he only pled guilty upon facing the death penalty, now receiving life without parole. This discovery spurred debate over whether or not he could actually be trusted. He was, after all, an eerily calm murderer. People tried to read his behavior more critically. Suddenly, his humility is coming off as a roundabout way to brag. The inconsistencies between the two tellings of the story could have been intentional. But for now, the subject is up to interpretation, as understandably, a lot of people are unwilling to dismiss him entirely. That includes criminologist Joshua Long, who spent years corresponding with him. His article about the experience was published on February 7th, 2023. Josh first reached out in the summer of 2021. He was researching stories of abuse survivors that took revenge. Not expecting much, he surprisingly received a response from Stephen. At this point, Stephen felt that his time was short and he wanted to share his story. The following is a paraphrased version of that account. The instability began at a young age. Stephen was born and called with a thin membrane around his head. This was viewed as a sign of the devil and blamed for the family falling apart. The subsequent neglect allowed him to roam the streets unsupervised. However, it also meant that there was no one looking out for his safety. In 1974, Stephen was approached by an overweight couple in an ice cream truck. They kidnapped him and locked the 10-year-old boy in their basement. He describes horrifying levels of abuse. They apparently stuck thumbtacks in his body and burned his skin with cigarettes. The pain was so unbearable that he would escape into his mind, creating a realm that he called the Dark Woods. He prepared for death every day, but it never came. And ultimately, this torture only ever ended because the man decided one day that it just wasn't necessary. The perpetrator looked him in the eyes and said it didn't matter because he was already dead inside. So he dropped Stephen off in an alley and he ran back home. And in spite of the boy's disappearance, his father offered no comfort. In fact, he actually blamed Stephen for letting it happen. This was the final straw for him, and he ran away, beginning a life of crime. Most of his adult life was spent behind bars, with a record of starting fights and stealing cars. He internalized this idea that he was empty, and his only purpose was to stop children from being hurt. With that said, it's worth noting that Josh was unable to corroborate this story. He couldn't find any evidence of this kidnapping having occurred. This could be explained by the father not reporting the incident. But also, Stephen had claimed to kill several gay men while hitchhiking. And when asked for more details about this, he refused to elaborate. To make matters worse, the article has since been deleted. It's unclear if this is related, but it could mean that Josh had found some kind of inaccuracy that he wasn't comfortable keeping published. Regardless, Stephen had clearly embraced his notoriety. Not only was he satisfied in having taken Ted's life, but if given the chance, he would do it again. He planned to attack more abusers if let out of solitary. And that was where Josh's real interest lied, finding it a sad reflection of reality. He writes, "Stephen's story cannot end well. It started off terrible and has only gotten worse. I'm grateful that he was willing to speak with me and share his experiences so we can learn from his tragic life. But I can't imagine any outcome that brings him real peace. There are an unknown but large number of victims of CSA who are technically survivors because they did not die, but who do not consider themselves as having recovered from their abuse. CSA is not a crime that can be repaid with some punishment or monetary fine. It is a traumatic experience that can have disastrous consequences for the victim, their loved ones, and society. Those children grow up. Some of them become self-destructive. Some become criminals. Some emulate their abusers. And some get revenge." Stephen Sanderson is a textbook example of how child abuse can result in violent crime. We all have an interest in preventing child abuse, because child protection is crime prevention. And that's the story of Stephen J. Sanderson. A question that people ask me a lot is why I've never covered Tub Girl on this channel. I mean, at this point, I've covered most of the big shock sites. And my answer to that is pretty similar to what my answer for Lemon Party was. That being that there's just not a lot of information out there about the image itself. That being said though, this being one of the biggest classic shock sites around, there is still a lot of lore around it to be covered. And I did come across something that may or may not tell us who was actually behind it. So for today's episode, let's take a look at Tub Girl. Well, I mean, not literally take a look at Tub Girl, because, you know, I like to still have a YouTube channel. But you know what I mean. I guess it would make sense for me to start this video by describing the Tub Girl image. It's easy for me to take for granted that all of you have seen it before, but I was surprised to find out how many of you hadn't seen Goatsy before, hadn't seen Lemon Party before, never saw Pain Olympics until you saw my video. So let me try and paint as vivid a picture as possible here. You got a woman lying on her back in a bathtub. She's bent herself completely in half, got her legs behind her head holding her toes in her hands. She's completely naked except for a pair of white, at least originally white, stockings. And she's wearing a mask of some sort. Originally it registered to me as kind of like a Patrick Bateman sort of mask. But taking a closer look, it's more of a pointy 70s superhero mask, like kind of like a Marvel Girl type of deal. But most importantly, there's a giant orangey stream of what appears to be diarrhea shooting out of her puckered rectum, arcing high up into the air and splattering all over her face. And that photographer really caught it at the exact perfect moment. It's a very solid stream at this point, like one of those artsy model photo shoots. Which I guess by some definitions, it kind of is an artsy model photo shoot. I mean, not for nothing, taking a closer look at it now, people used to like make comments about how it's a very well composed artistic image. And I always thought of these comments as being a bit tongue-in-cheek, and for the most part they probably were. But this thing really is more well-planned and more well-composed than your usual smut. And although there's a complete lack of context around this photo, the way it's selectively censored seems to indicate that it's from Japan. So this image is floating around on the internet in the early 2000s, before eventually winding up on tubgirl.com in 2002. It was that site where most people would become unintentionally familiar with it. You know how it goes by now, the old deal of you send it to your friend on AIM and they're like, hey, check out this crazy website I found. They're just like, fucking just poop splatter on her face. And there's actually a lot of debate over where this image first emerged. Some sources credit the website Consumption Junction. If you don't remember Consumption Junction, the best way I can describe it, imagine if Rotten.com had a baby with E-Bombs World. It was largely a mix of user-submitted content that was kind of a mix of funny stuff and fucked up stuff. This is how they describe themselves. With all that technology and the internet have to offer, most websites still ignore the fundamental element that drives everything: people. And what do we know about people? People are fucking sick. remove us from the trappings of civilization and morality, and we're just a tribe of shaved apes who like to fuck, laugh, and watch things die. Stop denying your instincts. Interestingly enough, the website tubgirl.com would eventually come to redirect directly to Consumption Junction, leading me to believe that that website was likely created by someone associated with Consumption Junction. Ultimately, Consumption Junction itself was sold, and it still exists currently, but it's just a normal porn site now. Although it's kind of funny to me that they still keep the vintage logo. Other sources claim that the image originated on Style Project. Style Project is a website that I feel like more of you are going to be familiar with. It just constantly found itself in the middle of controversy, often regarded, especially in its time, as the most fucked up website on the internet. So much so that it's actually the only time I've ever seen a website literally excluded from the Internet Archive. And at the same time, it had a big hand in shaping that early internet culture in a way that most shock content aggregators just didn't. It was sold in 2010, and currently, like Consumption Junction, it's also just a porn site. I'll probably go more in depth about the site itself in a future video, but honestly, I don't think the source of Tubgirl was either of these websites, because every reference to them being so seems to point to the year 2001. Meanwhile, it appeared on Rotten.com in December of 2000, with the caption, "It just shows how far Ali Sheedy's career has gone." That being said though, if you look at either the Consumption Junction upload or the Rotten.com upload, they each have a watermark that takes up the bottom of the picture. Later uploads of this image have the watermarked part of the picture simply cropped out entirely. But both of these sites featured the full image, which means that there had to be an unedited version of it floating around earlier that both of these sites had access to. And in that regard, a lot of people seem to point to the Something Awful forums as the actual origin of this image online. And considering how much stuff, especially in that time period, would pop up there first before spreading everywhere, it sounds like a really reasonable theory. So it goes through the usual cycle that shock sites did at the time. You got people tricking each other into looking at it, people making reaction videos to it. The initial interest peaks in the summer of 2005 and then again in 2007. It was in 2007 that perhaps one of the most infamous Tubgirl incidents happened. It was on October 19th of 2007 that Tubgirl was posted to the front page of Kotaku. It would remain there for 20 whole minutes. Eventually it was taken down and Kotaku would issue an apology. While I have control over what our writers do and can control to some extent what our readers do, I unfortunately have no control over what other Gawker editors do. Today, one took it upon themselves to post a very inappropriate photo on the top of Kotaku using someone else's name. We immediately worked to have it removed, but thanks to the inner tubes, the photo was on the top of the site for 20 minutes. There are jokes. I don't mind being the butt of them, but I do mind someone ruining the credibility I have worked so hard to build and maintain. I apologize deeply for having that photo pop up on top of our site and also into your office, your home, and probably indelibly into your mind. It would later be revealed that the image was posted by Gizmodo editor Brian Lamb. This had all been a prank related to a Halo competition between the two websites. And surprisingly, after making his own apology, Brian was allowed to keep his job. It was also around this time that a second Tubgirl image would emerge. I mean, there were already lots of parodies and copycats, but I mean a second image that appears to be from the same origin. It appears to be the same woman in the same position in the same tub. But this time she's wearing fishnet stockings with red lace, and she's wearing a blindfold instead of a mask. Instead of blurring her vag, there's a piece of paper with a crude drawing on it. And the liquid is all over the place instead of one solid, laser-targeted arcing stream. Some theorize that the lack of precision and artfulness in this particular shot seemed to point to the fact that this was an earlier version of it. A bit of a not-so-dry run, if you will. From that point on, though, Tubgirl would kind of just remain in the background of the internet. A touchstone of our shared culture of years gone by, occasionally popping back into view from time to time. But then in 2021 and 2022, it would get another burst of popularity due to TikTok. TikTokers began to discover it for the first time through a trend where they would record themselves before and after looking at Tubgirl. And that all basically brings us to the present day. Now, this is a video that I've tried to make a few times, but I've just never been satisfied with the amount of information I can dig up about the actual photo. Looking around, funny enough, I found references to something that I saw described as an interview with Tubgirl, only to realize the person they were calling Tubgirl was Leah Beldam because she's in that tub scene in The Shining. But there is something else that purports to be an interview with the actual Tubgirl. Posted to the bike chat forums by Ariel Badger in October of 2009. Conducted by some...
Tem muitos anos que não assisto o filme do Iluminado. Eu li o livro recentemente. Nossa, jovem a atriz, hein? No livro, a personagem é escrita como uma senhora de idade de mais ou menos uns 70, 75 anos de idade.
Someone named Simon
Quem não gosta do filme, o filme não é fiel ao livro dele.
Arte, who I could not find anything about. Needless to say, I have no idea if this interview is legitimate. But if it is, there might be some useful information in it. So here's the interview. May I thank you for agreeing to talk with us. What should we call you? Hi, just call me Tub Girl. You do have another name. Yes, of course I do. But you do not want to interview her. You want to interview Tub Girl. Okay, Tub Girl. You look much more normal in real life than in the image of you that most of us are used to. You seem to have lost a few pounds and are strikingly pretty. Thank you. The entire Tub Girl was a performance that we'd been planning for months. TF, the photographer, had requested I should put on 12 kilograms for the shoot, and I hid my face in the famous yellow mask. What was the significance of the mask? It gave me anonymity. I could be any woman, your wife, your mother, your sister, and of course, the Virgin Mary. It protected and at the same time removed the me from the shot. It showed how we covert and dehumanize women. Do you still have it? No, it was stolen and is now in the collection of a Japanese businessman. What was the meaning of the Tub Girl photo for you? It is about womanhood, how woman is the center of life, how she nourishes, eats, and of course the valuable things that come from her body. The gush of diarrhea is symbolic. It is a symbol of joy and happiness. It is all about life and birth. In that one moment of pure beauty, we see the circle of life from anus to mouth, the perfection of yin and yang.
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
One of the enduring mysteries of the picture is eugenitalia. They seem to be pixelated in an act of savage censorship. As I said, I could be the Virgin Mary at that moment. The desecration of the pudenda was a deliberate artistic act. Do both emphasize any deny me of the means of reproduction. I am mother to none and mother to all. Thank you, it has been a pleasure to meet you. This interview, if it's legitimate, seems like it's either poorly translated or transcribed from a video of some sort. All things considered though, I can 100% buy into the idea that Tub Girl was intended to be an art piece. Like, even knowing that there are people who get off to this sort of thing, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that was made specifically to get someone off. There's just simply too much work here put into getting the shot right. Especially if that second image that emerged was kind of a test image. And if it's the case that this interview is legitimate, then I guess we know that the photographer's initials are TF. I'm not well versed in the world of art photography, but if any of you are and know of a TF who does stuff like this, that could be our guy. But that's pretty much all we know at this point. Cowboys, the Wild West, are among the most classic subjects of all music. You got legendary songs like Dead or Alive by Bon Jovi, Cowboys from Hell by Pantera, Cowboy by Kid Rock. The list just goes on. But of all the artists who write about cowboys, by a very, very large margin, there's none more prolific than a man named Grant McDonald. And you see, the thing about Grant's cowboys, they're naked, and they're throbbing. That's right, for this video, we're gonna take a look at Ram Ranch. Our cowboy tale begins in, of all places, Canada. In another life, Grant McDonald, the hero of this tale, was actually an investment banker. Eventually, though, he would bore of this career path and leave the field to pursue his creative interests. And he tried a bunch of different outlets for this. Visual art, acting, erotica. And throughout all of his work, there was a consistent theme. That theme being homosexuality. Because, you know, he's gay. And that was no different when he began making music in the summer of 2012. That August, he wrote several songs about the risque side of cowboys. And he was very proud of what he made. So he attempted to pitch these songs to radio stations right in the heart of country music, Nashville. But the artist was instead met with backlash as they rejected all three of his gay country anthems. And in that moment, he swore revenge for what he saw as homophobia. In anger, he downloads a royalty-free metal instrumental and begins writing what would eventually become his magnum opus, that of course being Ram Ranch.
"18 naked cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Big haired throbbing cocks wanting to be sucked. 18 naked cowboys wanted to be fucked."
Now, in fairness to Nashville, you can listen to the stuff he was submitting. Not only do they follow the same formula as Ram Ranch, but they're just as explicit. I mean, look at some of the titles from the album Cowboy Butt. You got Sucking Cowboy, You Sure Are Hung, and of course, Sucking Hard Cowboy Cock. There very well may have been some homophobia at play in their decision, but I can't say for sure that refusing to play a song called Sucking Hard Cowboy Cock is proof of that. I mean, if I was on the radio, I would play that song, but the FCC might not be too happy with me. In any case, Ram Ranch was released without radio support on August 30th of 2012, though it went mostly unnoticed for years. Its first recognition came in 2014 on Reddit's r/WTF. The author of the thread claimed to have received a mysterious package containing one of Grant's CDs. Naturally, commenters were taken aback by the names of these songs and started investigating. And they quickly found Grant's music online, discovering that he at this point had made over 212 songs. While laughing at the absurdity of it all, some couldn't help but remark that it felt like there was something more at play here. I couldn't help but notice he's rap and country. Those are basically the least gay-friendly genres, so I can't help but think he's some kind of mad genius. If we had received that album at the radio station I was at, you can be damn sure we would have listened to it. It's not the gay parts that's WTF, it's how over the top it is. Even within this massive sea of music, the users fixated on Ram Ranch. There's just something about this song that made it stick out above all the rest. And one user loved it so much that he actually decided to play it on the radio station that he worked at. A lot of people warned him that he might get fired for this, but you know, in my opinion, and clearly this poster's opinion, it's worth it. So he ended up playing it during their Sunday night metal show to surprisingly no complaints. This thread was essentially the first time anyone had acknowledged Grant's music online, but it was far from the last. Months later, the song was uploaded to YouTube, which planted the seed for its eventual explosion. In early 2016, the Twitch streamer Ice Poseidon began taking song requests through donations. He allowed viewers to play music without screening the songs. Naturally, this resulted in a lot of trolling, mostly, raps with naughty words or obnoxiously loud ear rape mixes. And his fans were just out there hunting for the most weird, abrasive, or offensive stuff they can make him play, which ultimately leads them to Ram Ranch. And Ram Ranch instantly becomes a staple in the community. Within months, the YouTube uploaded song racks up hundreds of thousands of plays. This format as a whole proved to be really successful, and as a result of it, Ice's channel grew immensely. And it wasn't long till other streamers took note. And of course, Ram Ranch followed with them. It started to be spammed in Forsen's community before making its way across the entire site. It gets so popular that Twitch itself, with its famously inconsistent and inscrutable moderation, gets involved. In August, they start banning streamers who play the song for explicit content. That includes personally warning Forsen off-stream about its lyrics. This decision, as you might expect, pissed off a lot of viewers. And there
Copiei a matéria. Partilhando, claro, num todo. Falta pouco, mas... Eu já volto.
você pegue essa manta aí do sofá vermelho, leva lá embaixo,
Tá bom.
pra tirar os pelos do cachorro.
Tá. Isso aqui pode cortar lá, hein? Você acha que seria bom você tomar um sol também?
Não é necessário, só por foto da essa aqui bem sabidinha pra cair nos pelos. Aonde ela fica tem pelo, até dizer chega.
Ou que ele fica também, né?
Também.
fofa. Ó, dá um oi pra câmera aí, man. Minha bonitinha. Bom, voltamos, né?
They're quick to point out a double standard where there's all kinds of sexually suggestive content on the site, and in comparison, what's so bad about merely singing about throbbing cowboy cocks, if you could have half your actual ass out for all to see? So in protest of this, a safe version of the song was made.
18. Fully clothed cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Limp, flaccid, relaxed sexual organs, wanting to be left alone. 18. Fully clothed cowboys wanting to
Read a good book.
Cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Standing around not wanting to engage in homosexuality. Ram Ranch really rocks.
Judging by the fact that this upload got 200,000 views, it's clear that nothing could stop the momentum of Ram Ranch. And the song continues to grow in notoriety throughout 2017, and it escapes Twitch. It catches on in online games as a popular form of mic spam. People start making YouTube poops and other kinds of parodies.
Cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch, on their knees wanting to suck cowboy cocks. Ram Ranch really rocks.
It gets so big that eventually Twitch just has to end their ban on the song, so that streamers don't have to worry about their channel getting accidentally banned over a meme. That November, Asian Andy uploaded a video of himself playing the song in public at BlizzCon.
So, if I give you like $100, will you play Ram Ranch for me?
Wait, play what?
Ram Ranch?
Sure.
You know the song?
Yeah, I'll play it.
Oh, shit!
Naked cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Big head throbbing cocks wanting to be
Holy shit! They're doing it!
Yeah!
Yeah! What the fuck?
Cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch, on their knees
These wanting to suck cowboy cocks!
It received over 600,000 views. 1 month later, UCOG played the track in Guitar Hero without knowing what it was beforehand, and this clip garnered 1.8 million views. Which, I mean, how could it not? Just watch his face as he's digging the guitar riff, and then he hears the lyrics for the first time while simultaneously focusing on hitting the right notes.
Ooh. 18 naked cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Big head throbbing cocks wanting to be sucked. 18 naked cowboys wanted to be fucked. Cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch, on their knees wanting to suck cowboy cocks. Ram Ranch really rocks.
Ram Ranch was officially a staple of internet culture, and this didn't go unnoticed by its creator. That same year, in the wake of the song's skyrocketing popularity, Grant begins making new versions of Ram Ranch. He'd actually been asked to do this in the past, but previously was hesitant to do it. He didn't want to taint his masterpiece. He recalls, "At first, I was like, that's like Pink Floyd putting out Dark Side of the Moon too. But I figured if George Lucas can put out 7 Star Wars movies, I can put out Ram Ranch too." The first was a re-upload of the original with a different image, which went on to accumulate 20 million views. But he'd go on to create over 1,200 songs, with some of these songs lasting up to 20 minutes. What I'd give to have even a fraction of this guy's work ethic, and he just spends it all on naked cowboys. The most popular of these sequels wound up being Ram Ranch 7, which, no, the numbers actually have nothing to do with what order of song they are. Does that make too much sense? With over 2 million views, this one is about the US Marines holding Ram Ranch under siege.
Yeah, 28 US Marines pulling up in black Ford Raptor trucks, helicopters landed. Ram Ranch is under siege, under lockdown. US Marines are gonna fuck Ram Ranch cowboy butts.
Oh yeah, there's Ram Ranch lore now. There's a whole Ram Ranch expanded universe. Ram Ranch continued to be popular over the years as some kind of internet oddity, and Grant accumulated a sizable fan base with this, with over 70,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. Although none of them seemed to make quite as big a splash as Ram Ranch, his fans eagerly awaited every new song. But by 2022, it seemed like Ram Ranch was set to die out, as memes tend to do. Frankly, this meme had a much longer shelf life than most do. And shockingly, not only would it re-enter the public consciousness, not only would it become even more popular than ever before, but it would actually have an impact on the Canadian political landscape. In early 2022, hundreds of Canadian truckers organized a nationwide protest called the Freedom Convoy to fight against the federal vaccine mandate. It was an extremely divisive moment in Canadian history. Whereas it went on, you would have a lot of people supporting the truckers, but then you also had a lot of people who were opposed to their views, and then there were others who were simply angry about their behavior, with reports of disruption, harassment, and property damage from truckers. Before long, enough people were inflamed by this that they started a counter-movement against them, which led them to Zello, a walkie-talkie phone app that was the convoy's main form of communication. Ops began infiltrating their Zello channel to jam it with none other than Ram Ranch.
It's come to my attention that this group has been infiltrated. They set out to have one goal in mind, and the goal kind of worked its way in the inner circle, and it actually worked. Didn't actually think it was going to work. It was kind of a little too easy, if I'm being quite honest.
This clip goes viral, inspiring more and more people to join in on the campaign, a movement that's eventually dubbed the Ram Ranch Resistance. They used the hashtag to share information and coordinate with each other, and they also created Ram Ranch CA to promote charities and organizations impacted by the convoy. Signs reading "Welcome to Ram Ranch" started to show up in real life. And some even took to Tinder to match with protesters, set up meetings, and then direct them to Ram Ranch. And through all of this, the jamming continued, resulting in 3 separate Zello channels shutting down. And this moment right here is actually where Ram Ranch peaks in popularity. Given that Grant himself was Canadian, it wasn't long before he heard about all this. He was first informed by his nephew, and he was worried that the song had become popular with the truckers who he was not a fan of. Upon learning it was actually the opposite, he became ecstatic. Grant states in an interview, "I couldn't have been happier when I heard it was the anti-convoy group using the song. I love how it plays with the truckers' heads." And in response, he'd create a new song, a 20-minute long track entitled Ottawa Truckers. It is, as you might have guessed, about the truckers getting penetrated by the cowboys of Ram Ranch.
Yo, what do we see? At Parliament Hill, Ottawa, Canada, trucker boys in their big rigs, in their sleepers, stark naked, holy jeepers creepers, being butt-fucked by the Ram Ranch cowboy.
The convoy ends on February 23rd, with the Ram Ranch Resistance disbanding soon after. And in the aftermath, Grant continued to do what he did best, making songs about gay guys doing gay stuff. For a while, everything seemed to be as it should have. That is, until very recently. In researching this video, I came to the discovery that the original Ram Ranch video was gone. Not only that, Grant McDonald's entire channel is gone. It seems that in March of this year, his account was terminated for unknown reasons. It's not clear if this was due to graphic content or some kind of copyright issues, but all of his videos are no longer available. The only comment that Grant himself has given on this situation comes from the Ram Ranch subreddit. He blames the termination on Gordon Getty, California Governor Gavin Newsom, and Sergey Brin, and he didn't elaborate beyond naming them, so it's not really anything to go off of in terms of why specifically it's gone. To me, it seems more likely that it was some kind of community guidelines issue, but it's odd that Ram Ranch would have had so many problems with this. Because during past controversies with more mainstream musicians, YouTube has explicitly stated that its content rules are more permissive on music and things that it deems to be artistic expression. Yet, based on its lyrical content, it has faced issues from both Twitch and YouTube. And this all really harkens back to why Ram Ranch was made in the first place. Grant's legendary gay cowboy anthem was made simply to spite those who would censor his work. To see it become so controversial beyond the Nashville country scene, to the point of testing content policies and inspiring political movements, it's testament to just how successful he was at this goal. But still, it's a complete injustice that this legendary video has been removed. But at the very least, Grant seems undeterred. He's continued making songs and posting them to the aforementioned subreddit, and it seems that he's dedicated to continuing the tradition no matter how small the audience. But anyway, for now, that's the story of Ram Ranch. Right now, some of you guys are probably like, hey, I already thought you had a Blowfly Girl video. So allow me to clear up the confusion. Originally, I released my Blowfly Girl coverage in 2 parts. The first video being on Storyfire covering the original Blowfly Girl story, and the second one on YouTube covering the lore behind the blog. So I wanted to upload the Storyfire part like I've been doing with my old Storyfire videos, and I figured it would just make more sense to combine both parts into one. And if you have no idea what Blowfly Girl is, get yourself a succulent Greek meal, and sit back and enjoy. For my very first Storyfire exclusive, I decided that I would cover one of my most requested videos of all time. That being, the story of Blowfly Girl. I think it's a perfect start for me on this platform because rereading the story, I'm not so sure that I can get away with it on YouTube. I've gotten away with a lot on that platform, a lot more than I ever thought that I possibly could, but this one, I'm not so sure. But Storyfire, thankfully, has given me the opportunity to take the gloves off and just do what I'm gonna do. All that being said, this video is very, very obviously not intended for anybody underage, anybody squeamish, or prone to vomiting. But anyway, without further ado, I present to you the story of Blowfly Girl. Sunday was warm and sunny, just how I always fantasized it would be when I finally went through with it. I started walking to the dumpster again, I think about 2 p.m., and I was really excited and nervous. I felt butterflies in my tummy, just anticipating what I was about to do. And this opening passage right away demonstrates something to me that I think is a very interesting aspect of the Blowfly Girl's story. It often gets passed around as a true story, yet the writing of it feels very prosaic, almost as if it were a fictional fantasy story. The dumpster is in the alley behind a restaurant near my house. It gets emptied on Tuesdays, so by Sunday, it's pretty stinky and there are flies buzzing around. Which means there are things rotting inside there, and that's just perfect for me. A few times in the past, I climbed into that dumpster and masturbated. Nothing too intense. Most I'd ever done was take off my pants and hump against the dirty garbage bags. And one time I laid there with my eggs spread watching the flies land on me. So anyway, I walked down the alley to the dumpster, and as usual, I made sure nobody was around, just to be extra careful. You have to go behind a tall wooden fence to even see the dumpster, and the restaurant is closed on Sunday anyway, so I knew I wouldn't be noticed. But this time, there's no way I want to be disturbed. I climbed up and over the side and onto my hands and knees into the mass of plastic garbage bags and other miscellaneous rubbish. The bags felt warm from the sun. The smell in there was extremely foul. Much worse than usual, and I knew it was because of my rotting meat. I sat and tried to get myself to relax for a few minutes. There was no reason to hurry. When I was ready, I calmly took off my sandals, my jeans, and my panties. both pairs. I was wearing 2 pairs of tight panties with a bunch of my panty liners in the crotch, which keeps anything in my vagina from coming out when I move around. But I was going all the way this time, so I went ahead and got completely naked. That was a weird feeling, being totally nude inside the dumpster. It seemed very erotic to me. The sun felt warm on my skin, especially my boobs, which pretty much never see the sun. I took a pair of rubber kitchen gloves out of my pants pocket and put them on. There was no way I could bring myself to actually touch a maggot with my bare hands. Yeah, that's where you draw the line. You know, not any of the other stuff, not getting naked in a dumpster, but you know, you don't want to touch a maggot with your bare hands. That's ill, that's yucky. Lying with my back against the side of the dumpster, I fingered my pussy. I was really wet already. I knew I would be. The sensation of the rubber glove against my clit felt unusual, and I kind of liked it. I did that for a little while, just thinking about what I was about to do, while staring at the smaller garbage bag in the far corner of the dumpster where I'd left it yesterday. I still felt the butterflies in my tummy. I kept thinking to myself that I can't wimp out, that I had to go through with this. I wished for a moment that someone else was there to force me to do it, but decided that it was somehow much more sick and depraved to do it to myself willingly. And I thought, yeah, that's me. That's what I want. I deserve this. And so I knew it was time to do it. I got back on my hands and knees and crawled to the other side of the dumpster. I sat down next to my garbage bag, gently picked it up, and placed it in front of me. The terrible smell was already stronger. Carefully, I tore the bag open, and there they were. There had to be thousands of maggots, kind of beige yellow, with little black spots on them, all writhing in a large mass. I couldn't even see the rotting meat underneath them. Dozens more maggots clung to the inside of the black plastic, which was coated with a thick, light brown slime. It was such a repulsive sight, I thought I was going to throw up right there. But I didn't. I took a few minutes to get control of myself, fingering my clit while staring at the maggots, trying to work up the courage to continue. I scooped up some of the slime on my gloved finger and brought it to my nose. I knew what it was from the reading I'd done before. It was digestive juices from the maggots, full of bacteria, and it smelled just horrible. I thought to myself, that's what I'm going to smell like. That's the stench that's going to come from my vagina. I want that, I thought, spreading my legs wide apart. I dragged my slimy finger between my pussy lips. My clit felt like a hard little pebble beneath the slime. I didn't want to come right then, though, and I was still right on the edge of gagging, too. But I knew there was no turning back now, so I let my fingers lightly touch the top of the maggot mass. The maggots felt like nothing I'd experienced before. They seemed to have such energy, totally different from picking up an earthworm or something, and they felt so alive. I was fascinated and nauseated at the same time. Sinking my fingers into the mass, I felt the solid meat beneath. Gently breaking it apart, I could see that the meat had turned gray, except for the very center, which was still pink, and that the maggots had penetrated into it, but not too deeply yet. There was still plenty of food for my filthy little babies. I broke off a small chunk of meat that was covered on one side with the maggots, and held it for a moment when I fought back another urge to vomit. It was finally time, I thought. I leaned forward, and holding my pussy lips apart with one hand, I gritted my teeth, and pushed the maggot-covered chunk of meat into my vagina. And then, totally without expecting it, I had an orgasm. A quick, sharp one that only made me want more. And more was coming. I broke off another small chunk of meat, along with another part of the maggot mass, and pushed it inside me. This one had more maggots on it, and I stopped for a moment to see if I could feel them inside me. I wasn't sure if I could, but it didn't matter. I wanted them all. I needed to take them all inside me. With that thought, I went sort of wild. I started pushing bigger chunks of meat and maggots, and even handfuls of just maggots into me, over and over. I was practically hyperventilating too. I wasn't thinking at all about the noise I must have been making, but now, I could definitely feel the maggots squirming inside my vagina. Just the idea of it made me come again. Finally, once I had crammed all the rotten meat and all the maggots I could inside me. I felt so filthy, so disgusting, like I'd turned myself into some low, depraved sort of beast. And that made me so incredibly hot, together with the constant movement of the maggots inside me. But it was time to go. Holding my hand over my crotch, I slowly crawled back to my clothes and managed to get dressed again without anything coming out. I put the gloves back into my pocket and climbed out of the dumpster. And right then, I could hold back the revulsion of what I'd just done no longer. Holding myself up against the side of the dumpster, I threw up. Ever vomited while you were horny? It's weird. Walking home down the alley, I felt like I was in a daze. I kept asking myself how I could have done this to myself, but then asking why I'd waited so long. I had to walk slowly to make sure nothing got squeezed out of my vagina, but also to keep from coming again. I had found myself amazed at the whole thing, that I'd stuffed the most intimate part of myself with these things that were too disgusting to even touch without gloves. And that, I was totally getting off on it. Okay, so at least she also recognized the inconsistency of not wanting to touch the maggots with your bare hands, but then you just, you shove them all up in you. Once I was home, I locked myself in my bedroom, took off my clothes except for my double panties, and got into bed. I closed my eyes and just let myself feel the maggots squirming inside me. For a while, I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't really pay attention to it. The maggots were too wonderfully distracting. I skipped dinner. Later on, when I really had to pee, I did it by taking down my panties and holding my hand over my crotch, wearing the rubber gloves, of course. The next morning, I called off of work after being awake most of the night. I mainly stayed naked on my bed all day masturbating, barely getting up for anything. I wanted to do nothing but let my nauseating little babies grow inside my pussy. Pretty early though, I realized the smell was getting really horrible. I opened the window. I also wet a bath towel and stuffed it under my bedroom door. I didn't want my parents to get suspicious. A little later on, I realized that I didn't need the panties to hold the maggots and the meat inside me. The mass pretty much stayed in place as long as I laid kind of still. I thought, hey, I guess that means I'm infested, which made me come again. I was always right on the edge of orgasm, and it didn't take much to go over the edge. I also noticed that the maggots seemed to be more active if I kept my legs apart, and realized that they probably needed to breathe. Pet care 101. So that's how I stayed a lot of the time. I did get up and read my email and posted an update on my webpage, but I couldn't seem to think clearly enough to write much. Then I had to pee again, but I just didn't want to get up. So I just peed in the bed. It made me come. I just wanted to keep feeling the maggots moving, and they were. They seemed even stronger in anything. I was totally in heaven with it. I didn't eat at all either. I heard my parents come home from work. During the evening, my mom said hello through the door and wondered why I was staying in my room like a hermit. I said I was reading a novel all the way through at once, which I actually do sometimes. She left me alone. I hope she didn't smell anything. I surfed the web for a while that night and looked at porn. I came a few more times. I decided to go ahead and take a shit in my bed, right where I was. As one does, that just made me more turned on, and I ended up smearing some of my shit over my thighs and my pussy and coming again. I noticed that the maggots started coming out a bit. Maybe they liked the shit. A couple times, one would creep up on my belly. I just flick it back down between my legs. I was getting tired at that point. It really was time to sleep, and my vagina was throbbing and kind of sore from all the attention. But I was most worried about making sure my maggots could breathe while I was sleeping. Somehow, I managed to find the energy to place a chair on either side of my bed and use sheets to tie my ankles to them. That would keep my legs apart during the night. I pulled the blankets over myself and dozed off, lying in my piss and shit. For the most part, I slept through the night, but I kept waking up sweating with my vagina throbbing worse. I knew I was getting a bad infection from this, but I didn't care. I was not thinking right. I could also feel maggots crawling all over me. I guess I decided I liked that, and I'd play with my clit until I came again. I don't know if I realized at the time that I wasn't wearing the rubber gloves anymore. I'd fall back to sleep and wake up again later with little phrases running through my head. Other girls have babies, but I give birth to decay and filth, I'd keep thinking to myself. Or, I'd say I'm probably ruining my womb and I don't care. I want to be ruined. I know I must have been hallucinating from the infection. I was hoping the maggots had given up on the rotten meat and were eating my vagina instead. My fingers were buried inside my vagina, with my fingertips against part of the meat. Whenever I pressed on it, the maggots would squirm faster and I'd climax again. I could do it over and over and keep coming. Finally, it was Tuesday morning and sunlight made me wake up. I knew I was really, really sick at that point. I felt weak and dizzy. I knew I had a fever, and now my whole lower belly was sore and throbbing. Despite all that, I was still horny and I was right on the edge of coming. And then for some reason, all I wanted to do was see my maggots. I pulled the blankets aside and saw that I really did have maggots crawling all over my body. I was so whacked out, I loved it. But I also saw that I had a rash spreading over my tummy and my thighs, and I was soaked with sweat. And then suddenly, I needed to see what it looked like between my legs. I sat up a little, picked up the hand mirror I have on the table next to my bed, and held it between my thighs. My pussy was totally gaped, wide open. I'd never seen it like that before. It reminded me of a mouth in a sick, gagging expression. My inner lips were swollen and dark purple, almost black, while my outer lips were cherry red and I was losing a layer of dead skin, like a sunburn. A stream of the light brown slime was oozing from inside my vagina and down my butt crack onto the shitty mattress. Although I could still feel a large mass of maggots and rotten meat inside me, there were maggots everywhere between my legs, hundreds of them. And then I saw my fingers on my pussy. They plunged deep into my vagina and dragged out a wad of slime and maggots, which I pressed hard against my clit. I remember having a huge orgasm right then, and I must have passed out. I think I was sobbing too, but I'm not sure. That's all I remember until I woke up in the hospital. And thus concludes the story of Blowfly Girl. And now back to the question that always comes up with this story. Is it real or is it bullshit? Although the detailed, flowery, prosaic nature of the writing and the story arc that follows what seems like something taken literally out of a hentai manga leads me to believe that this is probably fiction, there actually is more to this story. You see, Blowfly Girl maintained a blog for several years, tracing all the way back to GeoCities. So stick around for my next video that takes a look at the person behind this story. I've gotten away with a lot on this channel that I never would have expected to. The jar, the scissors, the bacon, the box. But there's one story that I've been asked to cover several times throughout the years, and whenever I go back and read it, I think to myself, I'm not so sure YouTube's gonna let me get away with it this time. Maybe I don't want to push my luck. Of course, since you've read the title of this video, you know that what I'm talking about is Blowfly Girl. And I don't really know what would happen. Maybe they'd let me get away with it, maybe they'd give me a strike, maybe they'd monetize it like they monetized the Cumbox video, who knows? It's like a game of chicken that I play every time I upload one of these kinds of videos, so here's what I'm gonna do this time. I've uploaded my take on the Blowfly Girl story itself onto Storyfire, a new platform by McJuggernuggets that is going to let me get away with these kinds of things without having to worry about it. I'll put the link to that video in a pinned comment down below. But that being said, there's a lot more to Blowfly Girl than just the infamous story itself, and that's what I want to explore in this video. The history of Blowfly Girl, and inside the mind of the author herself. Blowfly Girl is probably the most infamous copypasta of all copypastas. And although, as I said, I'm not going to be reading the story itself on YouTube, I will give you a summary of it. Blowfly Girl tells the story of a woman with a fetish for filth and maggots. One day, she repeats her ritual of secretly pleasuring herself inside of a dumpster. Inside this dumpster, she had left behind a plastic garbage bag full of rotting meat, which had now become infested with maggots. She takes this concoction of food and bugs and shoves it inside herself, which she derives great enjoyment from. She drives back home while carrying her precious cargo, which she enjoys for a few days, and as she put it herself, other girls have babies, but I give birth to decay and filth. The story ends when she develops a severe infection and wakes up in a hospital. Sounds like fiction, right? This wild, prosaic story that sounds like something ripped from the pages of a Guro manga. Yet, during my research, I found out that such things do occur, and in fact, there exists a video depicting this very thing, which I'm not going to show you for very obvious reasons. So what's the deal with this story? Where did it come from? A lot of people think that this story simply appeared one day on 4chan. In fact, some sources point to a specific thread on B in May of 2007. And although this thread on B definitely contributed to the popularization of the story, it had been floating around the internet for some time. The first thing we need to look at is its name, Blowfly Girl. The thing is, although this story is often called Blowfly Girl, that's not actually the name of the story. Rather, Blowfly Girl is the name of the author, and the story itself is something she merely refers to as her maggot story. And this maggot story created by Blowfly Girl can be traced back much further, all the way to GeoCities. Unfortunately, Blowfly Girl's GeoCities page was terminated in 2005, presumably due to its content. And if you try to look at her original account on the Internet Archive, it's behind an adult content warning, meaning that you had to log in to get to it, which means that the Internet Archive wasn't able to save it. So the very first incarnation of Blowfly Girl does not appear to have been preserved in any way, but if you have it, I'd love to see it. After the termination of her account, Blowfly Girl would return in the new year on January 1st, 2006, this time with a new Yahoo account. Yahoo ID, Blowfly Girl 2. Real name, Deborah. Nickname, Blowfly Girl. Location, Northeastern Illinois. Age, 27. Marital status, single. Sex, female. Hobbies, slowly destroying myself, using my own sick perversions as a weapon. Descending into the depraved little hell I've created for myself. It all makes me come. Latest news. I can hardly wait for it to get warmer here so the flies will come back and deposit their repulsive little spawn for me, so I could feel them moving and growing inside me again. I want the maggots to make love to me and ruin me. Favorite quote: I'd like it if you'd look at my profile before you IM me. She also made single blog posts. Entry for January 1st, 2006. It's a new year, and I guess that means it's time to start new things, like this blog. Yahoo deleted my old GeoCities page a few months ago. Lost all of my contacts. Hopefully, this will last longer. This first blog post had 5 comments indicating that the story had already been spreading around the internet at some point, and in particular, a man named Richard had been telling people about it. This new blog, however, would quickly fall to the wayside as Blowfly Girl would make a different blog, this time on a site called Multiply. Blowfly Girl would post on Multiply throughout the next few years, but unfortunately, in 2009, this blog too was deleted. And unfortunately, like her original GeoCities page, this too was not archived. After her Multiply account was deleted, Blowfly Girl wouldn't be heard from for another few months until she created the Blogspot account, which is active until this very day. Saturday, August 22nd, 2009. Here I am. It's been a really long time since I posted anything. I lost my job several months ago, and about the same time, Multiply killed my profile there. That's where had I moved all my pics and blog entries to, so it's all gone. The only other place my pics were saved was on a PC at work. So anyway, I was really unhappy and just didn't feel like communicating publicly anymore. Maybe I'm ready to start again now. There was a story I wrote about my first sexual adventure with maggots. I thought I'd lost that too until I discovered that it's been reposted all over the web. It seems to be famous. I will put that up here if this turns out to be a good place. I wrote about my second time too, but it looks like nobody reposted that. It must be really gone. It had to do with a dead deer I found close to I-94 in Wisconsin about this time last summer. If anyone has seen it around, please let me know. I've realized that if too much time passes, I don't write very well. I couldn't possibly rewrite it. I'm going to be 29 next month. I haven't had a boyfriend or even been with a man since I was 18. My parents don't want to deal with me because I still refuse to go back to counseling. I'm working at Target now, and I barely have enough money to keep my apartment and keep my car running. I do make a little extra money doing
Vai, você quer sair? Uma parte eu tenho que pegar uns negócios. A próxima parte disso fica para mais tarde.
doing alterations on dresses, but it's not much. I don't have any future plans for myself. I don't have any marketable skills. I'm totally out of shape and I've gained some weight. I'm up to a size 14 now. And as hard as I've tried to change, I still feel like I'm a sick, perverse, filthy pig inside. I've tried to ignore the desires and disgusting ideas that come into my head. Dangerous things for me to do, forcing myself to get off. I always hope I'll change. I've been forcing myself to try, but the ideas never stop coming. So where does that leave me now? I continue to struggle against my talent for failure. Pretending to be a normal woman while living in fear of backsliding and doing something really bad to myself. I picture myself, in metaphor, walking and falling into an open manhole, hanging onto the edge with my fingertips and struggling to pull myself out. I keep falling in, over and over. And for a long time, I've been able to get out each time. But I just don't have the energy to struggle anymore. I want to let myself fall into the sewer now, and let myself sink into everything that is dark, dangerous, filthy, and perverse. Years of writing, photos, and memories wiped out in an instant. Every single thing she had ever done online would be gone were it not for the fact that her one maggot story became insanely internet famous. And this first post gives an interesting insight into Blowfly Girl's mentality. On one hand, she is miserable about how her paraphilia has negatively affected her life, but at the same time, she's very proud of the writing she's produced because of it. And shortly after she made this first post, she would go on to repost the famous maggot story on her own blog, this time receiving comments of various flavors. Jesse, thank you for showing me something new about myself. I actually found myself aroused by your story. We all have perverse parts of ourselves, and one day, we will all find someone who accepts those parts we don't like to talk about. Anonymous. The people who will accept these things about you are the people who have sick, twisted minds like you and this Blowfly girl. You need help. Seriously. Her last post of the year would discuss being depressed during the holidays. Depression. I have a really difficult time at the holidays. For some reason, my depression gets worse this time of year. It happens to a lot of people, I guess. My problem when I feel depressed is that I don't ever get out of bed unless I have to go to work. When I spend too much time sleeping, I start having really vivid dreams. Not all nice dreams either. Her post would go on to detail the dreams, mostly involving maggots and this kind of discrepancy between her excitement over the maggots but also her fear of people finding out about them. And that December was the last she was heard from until July 4th of 2010. When she would attempt to rewrite her deer story. Dead Deer, second maggot story. A few of my old contacts have emailed me asking if I would post the story of my second encounter with maggots. It's been about 2 years since it happened, and I had written about it the next day on my Multiply page. Unfortunately, Multiply deleted the page. I lost the story and everything. I hadn't kept a copy because I did everything from a computer at work. It's all gone. A lot of detail fades over time, but I tried my best to rewrite the experience. Once I got started, some of it came back to me, and I ended up really enjoying it. I'm glad I took the time. Hopefully, I haven't misremembered anything important. It happened on a Sunday afternoon while I was driving back home from Milwaukee. I can't remember now whether it was the weekend of Summerfest or Labor Day, but it was one of the two. As I mentioned, the following Monday night I wrote the whole thing out at work and uploaded it to my Multiply page. I even got brave and took some pictures before my hands got too dirty. I uploaded a couple of those to the page too, only the ones that I felt safe showing. Not a lot of me in them, not a lot of my flabby, disgusting, pale body in them, actually. I really wish I had even those few back. Multiply didn't respond to my email when I asked. And the revelation that pictures existed shines a bit of a different light on this story. You see, one of the biggest debates around Blowfly Girl is whether this was an actual thing that happened or whether or not it was just someone's attempt at writing fiction. If actual pictures were to exist of her experiences, it would definitely lead a lot of credence to the fact that this is in fact a true story. But of course, the Multiply blog, which those pictures allegedly resided on, is now gone and has never been archived. And even if the pictures did exist, it's not necessarily proof that the events described happened, just that at some point, she was in close proximity to a maggot-ridden deer corpse. After this, her next post would be detailing her feelings about turning 30. I'll be turning 30 this month. I guess that's supposed to be a milestone, but I'm pretty sure nobody's planning a surprise party for me or anything. I can't think of anybody in my life who'd want to do that. It's my own fault for being such a loner. I don't mind turning 30. When I was younger, I had expectations about what my life would be like at 30. I was way off the mark. I thought that I'd be working professionally as a costume designer for theater and movies, living in a trendy loft condo somewhere in Lincoln Park or something, surrounded by smart, sophisticated friends. Well, none of that has materialized yet. Considering my history of not being able to hold a job for very long, I guess I should feel lucky that I'm employed at all right now. Especially with the bad economy and everything. I have my own apartment and I have a car to drive, though I am still heavily subsidized by my parents, as my dad says. They don't mind. I'm sure they're very relieved that I've been emotionally stable. I guess I should set a goal to actually do something useful for myself this year. Do something besides slowly destroying myself through my perversion for filth. I mean, so far, what have I done? I nearly killed myself 6 years ago having sex with blowfly maggots. Wrote about it on my old GeoCities page, and the story became mildly infamous as one of the most disgusting stories on the internet. My gynecologist says that she can tell I'm unable to get pregnant anymore. At least I'm well on my way to destroying myself. It's an achievement. Seriously though, I have to mention that I've read comments on my blog and gotten emails from people wishing me well and hoping I will seek help. If you're one of them, thank you for being concerned. Really, sincerely. You sound like nice, compassionate people, but I'm okay. While I was growing up, my parents made me go to counseling, see psychiatrists, take antidepressants, all sorts of stuff. I'm happier without any help. And I'm only a danger to myself a very small percentage of the time. There's a lot more to my life that I don't discuss on my blog that if you knew about, you'd see I'm pretty normal. And at this point, a lot of her blog starts to focus on her work situation. In particular, she's very unhappy with her low-paying Target job, but at the same time, she's very dependent on the health insurance. Especially with her frequent health issues, such as the pinworm infection she developed after an interaction with a fan. The fan wrote to her about how much they appreciated her work and sent her a story called Julie's Slide into Depravity. And the thing is, Blowfly Girl had already read this story. In fact, although she commented that there were things about it that she intensely disliked, like the violence for instance, she actually credited it with helping her discover her interest in maggots. This interaction caused her to read the story one more time, and this time she became interested in one of the characters' interactions with dog shit. She went out and recreated this interaction with dog shit, and it led to her developing an unseemly pinworm infection. And it just so happened that at the time, Blowfly Girl became sick once again and was dependent on her Target health insurance that she got an offer to go back to her old job. This job, which was at a law office, was much better paying than Target, but at the same time, they didn't give health insurance, so she found herself kind of stuck in a situation because of her health problems. Ultimately though, a few months would pass and she returned to tell her fans that she did in fact accept the job offer. New job. I'm back working in the law office now. I quit Target. That's the first time I ever left a job without being fired. How depressing is that? The attorney that I'm working for, the one who asked me to come back, is actually a friend of my dad's, going back to when I was little. I'm suspicious that he was doing my dad a favor by asking me to come back. It would explain why he's also agreed to put me on the health insurance plan the rest of the office staff is on. Yeah. Anyway, this is the best job I've ever had, and I'm grateful to have a second chance at it. I don't mean to disappoint, but I've been kind of a clean girl lately. Probably just haven't been depressed enough since I started the new job. I cleaned up the apartment a little bit, enough to realize I had an ant problem last summer but didn't notice. I separated out the empty pizza boxes from the stacks of magazines too. I even put makeup on for the first time in ages. No reason, just felt good to do it. Anyway, anybody who's reading this has probably already done it, but I googled blowfly girl recently. I had no idea how much attention the stuff I've written has gotten. Looks like the consensus is that I must be sick in the head. Well, duh. What's funny are blog comments and forums where people shock each other by posting links to my stories. She also, for the first time, confronts the ramifications of her having created this story. I'm not going to betray any confidences, but I think it's worth mentioning that I've been exchanging emails with someone who has had an experience with maggots similar to mine. She got the idea from reading about what I did. I'm pretty sure she's sincere. She knows way too much about what maggots do when you mess around with them, and how they feel in your body. Either that, or she studies insects for a living and she's just playing with me. I'm not sure how I feel about having inspired someone to do that to themselves. Her posts will become a bit more sparse throughout 2011, in part due to the fact that she got hacked and she deleted all the racist comment that the hacker posted. However, she would drop by to inform people that she did actually manage to hold down her law office job. And Blowfly Girl would return in May of 2012, which as of now is the last long-form Blowfly Girl story. Finally, some fun. It was just getting light out Monday morning when I started driving home from work. It was overcast and gray and wet, and my mind was mostly on getting some sleep. But as I drove, I also began thinking about how bored I was. I really have been bored. On the spur of the moment, I decided to go have some fun. No idea what, but it's been way too long since I've had any. I had all day. I got on the Eisenhower and started heading west. Traffic was already slow and I wondered if I'd made a mistake, but soon I was on I-88, which was clear. Randomly, I exited at Route 59 by Aurora, kept driving, and started looking around for something interesting. All of a sudden, I was at Fox Valley Mall. I hadn't been there in many years. There's a road that rings the parking lots outside the mall. I drove slowly along the road, circling the mall a couple times, hoping something would catch my eye and wondering what kind of fun I could make for myself outside a mall that isn't open yet. There's a Greek restaurant on the west side of the mall. It has its own building and its own parking lot. The lot was empty. I drove around the back of the restaurant and saw a wooden enclosure where they keep their dumpster. But it was a pretty big enclosure for just the dumpster. I stopped and got out of the car to take a look. Could be interesting. And as she explored the Greek restaurant dumpster, she went on to reenact much of what happened in the original maggot story, filling herself up with octopus tentacles, chicken bones, shrimp tails, and driving all the way home without removing the contents. And she described how not depriving herself of that kind of excitement made her feel alive once again. I wasted a lot of time denying myself. It's been way more than a year since I did anything like this. I kept thinking that it was my depression that made me want to do things to myself, and that if I succumbed to the desire, I'd end up backsliding again, losing my job and everything I've worked so hard for. I was, and I am really scared of that ever happening. But maybe I don't have to be dead inside all the time. I went to work last night and everything's fine. Maybe I'm a depraved, filthy pig who can also hold a job. She would post very sporadically over the course of the next few years, speaking very frankly about dealing with her depression and thanking her readers for their support. She would also speak in detail about software upgrades at her job and considering going back to school to become a paralegal. She also made a post documenting her difficulty with being intimate with people, and in particular a date with a man named Eli. She regretted not inviting him inside after he dropped her off, but she was hopeful to see him again. And after a bit of a break, she would return in 2016 to reflect on the blog as a whole. It's April 24th, 2016. I posted something. I started my Blowfly Girl blog here mostly because of the feedback I got when I shared that first experience I had with maggots. I posted that first story first on my GeoCities page, yes, that long ago. So many people had things to say to me, whether curious, concerned, disgusted, or extremely erotic, that I wanted to keep posting whenever I did anything interesting, and that's where this blog came from. I'm an extremely shy, introverted girl who found a way to share my dark side. Also, to be honest, just hearing from people who found my experiences erotic has been extremely erotic for me too. But it's been a long time. Perhaps I've changed as I've gotten older. Ironically, I fantasize now about doing things to myself that are far more extreme than anything I ever did for real, but I've lost the courage, with exceptions, to actually do them. And I wonder if people are interested in hearing anymore from an approaching middle-aged woman instead of the nicely plump, horny, and pervy young girl I was who wrote about that first experience. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be very self-conscious. Anyway, this blog isn't dead. Not yet anyway. I'll continue posting depending on what my readers email me about. I have learned that for sure that not many people are interested in my job, my dating fails, I guess things didn't work out with Eli, or my cat, though I'll happily complain about any of them upon request. Don't comment here, spam has taken over, email me. And as of now, the last post on our blog was made in January of 2017. It's a brief post in which she basically just documents her favorite comments that she's received throughout the years. I read my comments. Welcome to 2017. I have nothing new to talk about except that I read through my whole blog today. I'm actually kind of sad right now because it's been such a long time since I've done anything horrible worth writing about. I also read the comments on my blog. I never have before. Some of it is spam, obviously, and other comments are invitations to Jesus, but some of the rest are just priceless. I've been missing out. I guess this is one benefit of having a blog online for a few years. Amazed to read your blog. Funeral programs to memorial programs are gaining popularity because they provide grievers with another way of memorializing. My 10-year-old cousin read this story in front of his mother while she was eating. I don't want to live on this earth any longer. Beautiful and inspiring. I have played with roaches and cunt and ass many times. We seem to have common ground here. I'm glad you're doing well. Please don't do any more of these things, they sound dangerous, XX. The story of Blowfly Girl is really unique that it's really, at this point, a 15-plus-year-old story that made her legendary, yet she kept up the blog for so many years. And it's through this blog that we got to see into the mind of the person who wrote it, ostensibly the star of the story, and watch them evolve throughout the years. And with all that in mind, you still have to ask, was this a real story? Was it made up, or maybe it was some kind of blend of the two where maybe you had a person who really had these thoughts, but only ever enacted them through their writing? I'll put a poll up to see what you guys think it is. In September of 2012, a Redditor named Kraylon was hanging out at his cousin's neighbor's house. Kraylon had only known the neighbor, who he referred to by the pseudonym Rob, for about 2 weeks. When they're in Rob's room, Kraylon begins to notice a smell. In fact, the whole room kind of smelled like doo-doo. They're sitting around and Kraylon just can't take it anymore. He has to ask, what's that smell? Rob shamefully points over to a half-open drawer, where they discover it. The cum boxers. Goddamn, that buildup looks like congealed pizza cheese. Kraylon shares the picture to Reddit, and people are quick to ask, why are you touching it? So you gotta understand, it's not Kraylon touching it. It's Rob holding up his cum boxers like a trophy for all to see. All to be shared for that sweet Reddit karma. That right there is 7 years of hard work. And when asked why he didn't just use a paper towel or something like a normal person, he said he thought that was too much work. Honestly, to me that sounds like a lie. I mean, isn't it just as much work to go over to the drawer and get your designated cum boxers as it is to just, get a tissue or something? And then you're just sitting there in that stench all day. It's not like he's blind to it either, because he's clearly aware enough that when someone asks, what's that smell? He knows exactly what they're talking about. This definitely wasn't laziness. He enjoyed that shit. Nevertheless, he thought that Kraylon and his cousin were overreacting. But in any case, he was proud of all the attention his cum boxers were getting now. And that's the story of the cum boxers. Yeah, for today's episode of Tales from the Internet, we're gonna look past the cum jar, the cum box. We're gonna be taking a look at
of your body. This ranges from everything from belly inflation to butt inflation to dying via failed attempt to inflate one's balls using silicone. Uses of Microsoft Paint. Bear with me here. So inflation, broadly put, is a fetish or fantasy that pertains to inflating parts of your body. This ranges from everything from belly inflation to butt inflation to dying via failed attempt to inflate one's balls using silicone. Do not ever do this. It will kill you. And since IRL inflation presents such a clear safety risk, it's largely confined to the realm of fantasy, which is why much of the inflation art that you might encounter on DeviantArt or adult art spaces tends to be quite extreme. But it's always important to stay protected, online or off. Now, I don't know if you know this, but using the internet without using a VPN is like leaving your phone unattended. Anyone can see your DeviantArt page. That's why I always stay protected online thanks to today's sponsor, Private Internet Access. As the world's most transparent VPN provider with over 30 million downloads, Private Internet Access hides your IP address, encrypts your internet connection so that your data stays safe from hackers and prying eyes, and never stores, logs, or records your data. In fact, Private Internet Access has actually gone to court to prove their no logs policy. That's how seriously they take your privacy. Plus, Private Internet Access allows you to change your IP location to over 91 countries and all 50 states. And since they work with all major streaming services, you can get around content that's blocked in your country and watch movies and shows from wherever you want. It's available for all platforms: Windows, Mac, iPhone, Android, Linux, and one subscription lets you protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Signing up is risk-free, so go to piavpn.com/scumbagovich to get 83% off Private Internet Access plus 4 months free. That's only $2.03 a month, plus you get an extra 4 months completely free. Thank you so much to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video, and on with the show. So, as far as Lashana Ball is concerned, she belongs to an unofficial fetish genre known as circle inflation. Quite literally, using the circle tool in Microsoft Paint or a similar program to inflate your favorite cartoon baddie into a sphere. Due to the -10 effort required to create such works of art, and due to the fact that circle inflation doesn't really break any rules since very little about it is obviously sexual, it's been eating up DeviantArt's server space since day one. But let's be charitable. There are definitely at least a few people who find the circle tool shtick to be genuinely arousing. So let's dive into why that is. Though inflation as a fetish predates the internet, there are a few notable examples in recent years that have visibly altered how online inflation art looks for good. The inflation Wikipedia page prominently cites the blueberry transformation scene in the 2004 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie as a mass fetish awakening for this community. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, the scene involves a girl chewing a special piece of gum designed to feel and taste like a full meal. When she gets to the dessert part, things go awry, and she begins to turn blue and inflate, much like the blueberry pie that she's tasting. Blueberry inflation, as it would come to be known, remains a core component of the inflation scene, and the appeal of inflation itself, as described by one DeviantArt user, goes thusly. When I was about 6 to 8 years old, one of my favorite films at the time was the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. In this film, there's a character by the name of Violet that swells into the shape of a blueberry. Since this is one of the first women that I was exposed to in film in my age range, with any lasting memory, I was somewhat attracted to her. What happened to her also frightened me in a way, and left a clear mental image of a girl's body expanding outwards in all directions. As a child, I was also exposed to an abundance of cartoons. A common gag used for laughs in cartoons is a character swelling up or expanding when attached to a hose or air pump. The constant bombardment of these stimuli turned into a sexual fetish when I started to hit puberty. This is the case with many people I've communicated with online, and what movies and shows they watched as children have greatly impacted the style of inflation that they find personally attractive today. And on a more visceral level, inflation fetishists cite the feelings of power play, helplessness, and body modification as the high points of this interest. But unfortunately, we'll never get the true answer to just how freaky Lashana Ball was intended to be, because the artist who made her has popped out of existence. Gwenfan XXXX, by all accounts, seems to just be a preteen girl who had a fixation on Total Drama Island and a big imagination. She's never made anything resembling the Ball OCs before or since. And chances are, if you were an even slightly artistic preteen girl in 2012, you probably also had a DeviantArt full of crudely drawn self-inserts and silly art that most likely was an inside joke that got lost in translation. We know virtually nothing about Gwen Fan today, as she abandoned her DeviantArt roughly a year after she began it. But in my humble opinion, Wishanaball, as intended by the artist, was not a fetish. It just bore a deeply unfortunate resemblance to the real thing. And I wish I could tell you a longer story, but the really exciting thing about Wishanaball is that we as viewers get to see what might be a lasting meme very early in its lifetime. Kind of like what's happening with the troll face right now. But even if Wishanaball were to fall off, the fans will always stick around. Cause fuck it, we ball. This has been Bad Art History.
Epocler, 2 vezes mais potente que a concorrência. Epocler, seu fígado sente a diferença.
In 2011, an American furry was possessed by an entity and forced to write one of the most infamous creepypastas of all time. The resulting internet urban legend, Sonic.exe, was so full of grammatical errors, plot holes, and hyperrealistic blood that it instantly became a horror icon, only to be banned shortly after it was posted. So why, among all the Slendermen and suicidal Squidwards, does Sonic.exe have such a cult following? Why are we unironically obsessed with dark, edgy versions of our favorite characters? And whatever happened to the furry diddler who created this entire thing? This is a crash course in Sonic.exe. This is Bad Art History. It all begins, as many of these things do, with a furry who likes kids. But in case you've never heard of this before, Sonic.exe is the name of a notoriously terrible creepypasta, short internet horror fiction, about a haunted copy of the original 1991 Sonic game, in which Sonic bites off Tails' head, makes blood come out of his own eyes, and calls himself God. Pretty heavy stuff. But with every rise comes a fall. And just as Sonic.exe was achieving mass internet fame, admins on the site where it was originally posted took the story down without any warning, prompting the author to have such a legendary meltdown that attention would soon turn to his other online activities. But before we can dive into any of that, you probably have a few questions. What was this story actually about? Why did it get banned only after it attained such a huge fan base? The reason is objectively really funny, but it's hard to explain anything further without reading the pasta. And for the next few minutes, I'll spare you my obnoxious accent and let you surf this wave yourself. A wavy web surf, if you will.
To catch you up to speed, one summer day, our protagonist Tom pauses his epic gamer sesh of Sonic Unleashed to check the mailbox. Inside, he finds a CD port of the classic 1991 Sonic game. Alongside it is an ominous note written by his boy Kyle, whom Tom hadn't seen in several weeks. I can't take it anymore. I had to get rid of this thing somehow before it was too late. He's after me. Please, Tom, destroy this godforsaken disc before he comes after you too. I went up to my room and put the disc in. When the title screen popped up, I noticed that it was the first Sonic game. I was like, awesome. The first thing I noticed that was out of place was when I pressed start, there was a split second when I saw the title image turned into something much different. Something that I now consider horrifying. The sky had darkened. The title emblem was rusted and ruined. The Sega 1991 was now instead Sega 666. And the water had turned red like blood before cutting to black. But Sonic, his eyes were pitch black and bleeding with 2 glowing red dots staring right at me. And the music was that creepy Caverns of Winter music from Earthbound. And his smile had stretched wider up to the edge of his face. I figured that it was just a glitch and forgot about it. And then another weird thing happened. I picked file 1 and chose Tails. The game froze for about 5 seconds, and I heard a creepy, pixelated laugh. Tom, a seasoned and intrepid gamer, continues playing the game, but everything is ever so slightly off. And as Tails progresses through Hill Zone 1, he notices that the ground is littered with the mutilated corpses of his animal companions. But then, finally, a familiar face. Tails notices Sonic way off in the distance. Suddenly, I began to have a growing feel of dread as Tails walked closer to Sonic to get his attention. I heard a faint static growing louder as Tails was but inches away from Sonic and stopped and stuck his hands out to touch him. Suddenly, in a split second, I saw Sonic's eyes open, and they were black with those red glowing dots. Just like the title image, the screen turned black. I was taken to a different level with the level title now saying Hide and Seek. Tails looked as though he was scared out of his wits this time, making frantic gestures to me as if he wanted to get out of the area he was in as fast as possible. But then Sonic appeared right in front of Tails, and Tails looked up in horror. Blood started to come down those blackened eyes of Sonic's as a grin slowly grew from his face. I was so shocked by what had happened. Did Sonic murder Tails? No, he couldn't have. He and Tails were supposed to be best friends, right? Why did Sonic do that to him? The red static lasted for about 15 seconds, and then it showed me a most unpleasant image. The image showed an image of Sonic standing in the darkness where you can only see his face. He looked so real, you could actually see the lines in his blue fur. His face, oh God, he had the most horrifying smile I'd ever seen. There was text, "I am God." I heard a voice right behind me, like a whisper. "Try to keep this interesting for me, Tom." I turned around to see where the voice was coming from, and what I saw made me scream. Sitting on my bed, staring right at me, was a Sonic plushie, smiling with bloodstains under its eyes.
Powerful stuff. Now, assuming this is the first time you've ever fully read Sonic EXE, it may be a lot to process. But processing power isn't much of an issue for this channel, because today's video was made possible by the one, the only, Meta PCs. Meta PCs is a PC company specializing in award-winning custom builds for any. How exactly did something like this blow up? Let's do a quick timeline. 2011. On August 9th, user JC the Hyena, digital artist and self-professed prince of everlasting darkness, takes inspiration from this edited screenshot and uploads a scary story to the Creepypasta wiki. And like all wiki sites, it's operated by a team of admins who can delete any submission they want at any time for any reason, which would become a huge problem for JC. But for the time being, Sonic EXE immediately picked up steam, with commenters simultaneously praising it for being pants-shittingly scary and also accusing it of plagiarizing much more famous works. But to the fans, this mattered very little. And on August 13th, 2012, the release of the Sonic EXE fan game changed everything. Everyone who was anyone was covering this game. PewDiePie, Markiplier, this guy from Brazil. And while its detractors claim that the story was unoriginal, poorly written, and unintentionally hilarious, the fact that you could play it for yourself put it leagues ahead of the competition. But I truly believe Sonic EXE popped off for a much simpler reason. Sonic fans are insane. Between Sonic's deeply unfortunate history of fan creations, a series of games of extremely varied quality, and the bizarre tendency of Sonic fans to create extensive lore, it was just right place, right time. And the early 2010s was huge for internet horror. Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, Smile Dog, Man Door, Hand Hook, Car Door, and Sonic EXE remain hugely influential on today's internet landscape. Think about how much popular online fiction over the last 10 years has been horror-oriented. The Backrooms, SCPs, analog horror, mascot horror, ARGs, many such cases. But the accusations of plagiarism are pretty troubling, which begs the question, if JC the Hyena didn't come up with these ideas, then who did? Edgy Sonic reimaginings have actually been around for as long as Sonic has. Back in 1993, the developers of Sonic CD stuck this spooky Sonic into the sound test menu, scaring the crap, rather unintentionally, out of anyone who might find it. In the 2000s, DeviantArt was overrun with emo, edgy Sonic OCs. In fact, I challenge you to type in your first name, the Hedgehog, into Google Images and try not to cut yourself on the edge. And notoriously, in 2005,
Desafio aceito. teve isso? Meu, claro que tinha que ser essa porcaria. Claro que tinha que ser essa porcaria aqui. Oh.
Sega released the edgiest game ever designed, Shadow the Hedgehog, in which Shadow, Sonic's dark, brooding counterpart with highlights, balances the fate of humanity while riding a cool motorcycle and shooting a gun. This is a game about an animal that wears shoes. But to give credit where it's due, JC did come up with one original idea. As he wrote in a Fur Affinity journal entry in October 2012, what is Sonic EXE? Many of you fans speculated that he was God, Satan, or a really powerful demon from hell, and all your interpretations of my creation have amused and entertained me. He's an entirely different entity, one that created itself. See, the creature that is Sonic EXE was created in the void, in a gap between dimensions. He learned about Sonic the Hedgehog, and was right there and then a big fan of the series, and especially its character, Sonic. He mainly goes after video gamers and Sonic fans, but he has a certain hunger for the kind of video gamers who talk smack about Sonic. He wanted his own world to rule so his slaves would have a place to be, so he could enslave them. He hopes that one day, the doorway between his world and ours will break open, and all of his dark powers will pour out into our world. Maybe someday, he'll get that chance. Demon emoji. So basically, Sonic EXE is original in that it's the first Sonic OC that is explicitly pro-slavery. Without the cheesiness of the early 2010s, it's very unlikely that we'd be precisely here today. And speaking of cheese, I alluded to the fact that Sonic EXE was banned, even though it is clearly very easy to find right now. And the reason I drag this out is because in what is one of the funniest things I have ever heard in my life, Sonic EXE was considered to be so poorly written by the admins of the Creepypasta Wiki that less than 2 years after its publication, they simply would not abide this thing on their website. And if you've ever read like a regular creepypasta that didn't get popular, you probably know that the average writing quality is like stroke-inducingly bad. So it's no surprise that upon learning what had happened to his creation, JC lost his mind. And now that we finished discussing Sonic EXE's rise, it's time to discuss the fall. Fur Affinity, the furry art-sharing website. On January 14th of 2014, JC took to Fur Affinity and wrote a scathing journal entry accusing the creepypasta admins of bull-friggin' horseshit. As he put it, the admins of the Creepypasta Wiki have finally decided to delete Sonic EXE off of the wiki, on the grounds that it was, quote, badly written and, quote, had too many cliches and, quote, was a bad example of what should be a creepypasta. But to be clear, a revised version is still up on the site, and the full version has been reposted basically everywhere else. And after 2014, Sonic EXE experienced a decline in popularity, until two huge gamer moments completely turned things around. The first was the Sonic renaissance brought on by the release of Sonic Mania, the 2020 live-action Sonic film with the terrifying CGI, and the age-old curse of liking something ironically for so long, it becomes unironic. And the second was Friday Night Funkin'. Released via Newgrounds in October of 2020, this rap battle rhythm game met instant commercial success and maintains an active fan community even today. One of the biggest factors in its success was fan-made mods. So when the Versus Sonic EXE mod dropped in August of the following year, a new generation of young gamers who were probably in grade school during the pasta's origin were exposed to this legendary meme for the first time. And like fans of old, these kids immediately got to work, making their own edgy OCs, alternate universes, and lore. But by the time Sonic EXE experienced its second wind, JC had been completely cut out of his creation. Because ironically, this guy was way scarier than anything he tried to write. JC the Hyena, active on Fur Affinity since 2010, is a digital artist with a love for Sonic the Hedgehog, macro fetish art, and erotic Discord roleplay. And in July of 2021, right before the Friday Night Funkin' mod would put JC's creation back on the map, Twitter artist Broken Dollmaker posted screenshots of JC engaging in very inappropriate conduct with a 14-year-old who he knew to be 14 over Discord. He was 26 at this time. And the following month, user Shay took ownership of the Sonic EXE story from JC and his then girlfriend, who voluntarily outed herself too as a pedophile. So, what's left? Shay continues to helm the Sonic EXE project and maintains no connections to the original creator. Sonic EXE continues to amass new fan projects, ironic and sincere to this day. In fact, the Sonic the Freecog meme going around right now actually uses a design from one of the fan characters. And as for JC, his behavior is irredeemable and his cancellation deserved. But he did leave a parting note before vanishing entirely in the form of a confession and a plea for other victims generally to come forward. And in a true case of separating the art from the artist, Sonic EXE lives on in the hearts and minds of millions. One of the silliest and most legendary pastas to stand the test of time. And though its legacy is spotty, there's no slowing this meme down. Because like Sonic always says, gotta go fast. This is the worst one. I spent 45 minutes trying to come up with a pun for this video and I could not do it. I am so sorry. This has been Bad Art History. This video was made possible by scum cells like you. Thank you. Huge shout out to the Scum Brotherhood, Fat Pug, Freppy, Green Goat, Jason Meyer, Kale, Kitty as Fleas, Kyle, Matt Voltron, Maxie, Perry, Rob Knob, Rotten Pie, Rottweiler, Scoo, Slothin 3D, and Trevor Savage. And to Scum Babies, Acidic, Alice, Alexander First, Angel Perez Calzada, Apoptosis Necrosis,
Deixa eu desativar a dublagem automática. Eu não quero assistir isso dublado. Tá que pariu.
Cabelo espetado, roupa surrada.
Não quero saber de dublado. O original.
Spiky hair, distressed clothes, safety pins, not being able to sing, and people being angry about stuff. These elements make up an average person's understanding of punk. However, if you've clicked on this video, I suspect you're not the type of person who thinks paying this guy for a selfie in Camden Town is the pinnacle of what the punk subculture has to offer, and I assume that you are somewhat aware of how groundbreaking and influential this movement was in the latter half of the 20th century. Like a lot of subcultures, punk was born out of music, and despite being notorious for simplistic instrumentation and abrasive vocals, it went on to be incredibly influential. The same can be said of punk fashion. Ever since the late 70s, the fashion industry has had an affair with the punk aesthetic, which many deem controversial, as a lot of what punk is supposedly meant to rebel against is epitomized by the fashion industry.
Simples assim, ó. Not DIY, not DIY, not punk.
This pisses people off even more when they find out that high fashion brands specifically love to get their grubby little mitts on the aesthetic. This has led to some brands selling typical looking DIY punk clothes for some pretty eye-watering prices. Ugh, Sid Vicious would be rolling in his grave at the idea of high fashion infiltrating and perverting the sacred, anti-establishment, anti-conformity holy grail that is punk. Wait, who made the clothes for the Sex Pistols again? Yeah, as you can see, this is a complicated subject with a lot of layers. While there are definitely cases of punk being mishandled and bastardized by the fashion industry, there are also a number of designers who have really progressed fashion in new and interesting ways and have heavily influenced how people dress, all off the back of punk influence. To understand all of this, we need to go back to the 70s when it all began, and despite common assumption, it did not originate from the UK. America is where we will be starting this journey. Despite how wise, knowledgeable, insightful, and good at reading Wikipedia I am, I can't really be bothered to go in depth and explain the context and early influences that resulted in this American pioneered music scene, seeing as at this point, fashion was yet to be intertwined with the unrealized punk subculture. However, what is important is when the proto-punk genre started to emerge. As the name implies, the proto-punk categorization exists purely to denote the bands and artists who foreshadowed the birth of punk and does not indicate a common sound or musical style as most types of genres do. Instead, it refers more to the rebellious energy and attitudes that these musical acts would exude. The best example I can present without using copyrighted music is Iggy Pop of Iggy and the Stooges, who were a seminal proto-punk group. Iggy Pop was notorious for his chaotic energy and crazy onstage behaviour, which would be emulated and built upon by not only future punk acts, but also artists from many other genres. I mean, a lot of people consider this man to be the pioneer of the stage dive. So basically, Iggy jumped so that Playboi Carti could front flip. And I guess so Gigi Allen could shit himself on stage somewhere in between on this timeline, but anyway, I digress. The New York CBGB venue is considered to be the place where the rough proto-punk gem became the still very rough and unpolished punk jewel. Many proto-punk acts and pioneering punk bands famously performed at this New York venue, but for now we will be focusing on the New York Dolls, who in terms of fashion actually had a glam rock look. During the mid-70s, around the time the band would have done shows at the CBGB venue, they were briefly managed by an Englishman by the name of Malcolm McLaren. In between dressing up the New York Dolls and getting them to perform in front of a certain hammer and sickle flag that America famously...
Conheça o Wix Studio, a plataforma web para agências e empresas, onde a liberdade criativa encontra a eficiência total.
He really likes, Malcolm would scope out other musical acts within the New York punk scene. One man in particular caught his eye, Richard Hell from the band Television, who had a very unique personal style that featured spiky hair and ripped clothes with DIY elements. Malcolm's reaction to this look was, "Yeah, gimme that," and immediately hopped on a plane back to England, where he planned to act on the inspiration gained from his trip across the pond. Once back from New York, Malcolm McLaren wanted to rebrand the West London-based boutique run by him and his girlfriend called Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die to the name Sex. From a modern perspective, this might seem like a try-hard or even childish way of trying to make the shop seem rebellious, but at the time it was a very provocative move and the local neighbourhood was not very happy. For context, the shop was in Chelsea, which is famously one of the poshest boroughs in the whole of London. There is even a reality TV show about the average Chelsea resident's lifestyle if you ever want to watch the most insufferable, privileged and out-of-touch Londoners pretend their relationships aren't scripted by Channel 4 producers. The shop had rebranded a number of times and had been very successful in selling clothes that cater towards the rock and teddy boys style. The American pioneered punk movement had started to pick up steam in the UK, so Sex aimed to sell clothes catered to that audience along with fetish and bondage wear. McLaren had realised that with so many music fans trying to emulate the fashion of their idols, it could be a very lucrative endeavour to create a band that was dressing clothes sold by his boutique. In his own words, "We decided we needed mannequins to model our clothes, and so we invented the Sex Pistols." As most people already know, the Sex Pistols became extremely iconic and pioneered the UK punk look, which is also considered to be the standard or traditional style of the genre. The person responsible for designing the fashion of the Sex Pistols and a lot of, if not most of the clothes sold at Sex was Malcolm's girlfriend, also known as Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne Isabel Swire was born in the English county of Derbyshire in 1941. Her father was a cobbler and her mother worked in the local mill as a fabric weaver. At 17, her family moved to the Harrow borough of London, where she worked at a local factory and then later enrolled at a teacher training school. Vivienne married a man named Derek Westwood, from whom she took her surname. She gave birth to her first son, Ben, and started a seemingly normal life as a primary school teacher. However, this would all change in the late 60s. Before then, she had actually completed a single term of a jewellery and silversmithing course at the Harrow Art School, but she dropped out saying, "I didn't know how a working class girl like me could possibly make a living in the art world." Despite her teaching career, she still stayed a creative person as she made jewellery which she would sell at Portobello Market, and she even made her own dress for her first wedding. After her divorce from Derek, she met Malcolm McLaren, who was an art student friend of her brother. She initially wasn't interested in him, especially as, according to Vivian, he did not look after himself. Essentially, Malcolm was a bit of a slob who would not stop pursuing her romantically. She began to pity him and, as a result, started to do stuff like cook for him, among other things a mother would likely do for a child. At one point, Malcolm fell ill and didn't own a bed, so Vivian let him sleep on her one during the daytime while he got over his fever. However, he just refused to leave and was there for days, which resulted in Vivian getting pregnant and the start of their relationship. For any impressionable man-child slobs watching this, please do not try to do this. Despite what 4chan probably tells you, this is not what we call W-Riz. Anyway, despite all of this, she would later say, "I latched onto Malcolm as somebody who opened doors for me." Vivian would go on to stock the shelves of Sex and all previous iterations of the boutique with her designs. At first, she was mainly making graphic print clothes with extremely provocative and controversial designs. However, these weren't just purely for shock value, and most of them had a political message behind them. Being politically outspoken is not only inherent to punk, but also to Vivian herself, as she would famously partake in activism throughout her whole life. In fact, the choice of making clothes like this that were more aligned with the punk scene was part of Vivian and Malcolm wanting to distance themselves and their boutique from the Teddy Boys scene, which at the time had started to become notoriously racist. This also led to the shop being renamed to Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, and then a year later to Sex, to further align with the growing punk scene in the UK. Vivian continued to make controversial graphic print clothing, but also started to incorporate distressing and bondage elements. The shop became extremely successful as it gained a community of young, rebellious fashion enthusiasts who largely felt disenfranchised by the political and economic state of the UK during the mid to late 70s. This now leads us to the formation of the Sex Pistols. Many people believe Malcolm McLaren formed the band from scratch in a modern build-a-boy band style like Simon Cowell did with One Direction, but this isn't completely the case. The band was originally formed under the name The Strand in 1972 by friends Steve Jones, Paul Cook, and Wally Nightingale. Steve Jones would spend a lot of his time stealing things, especially musical equipment. This is how he and his mates gained the instruments to start their band. He would often frequent Malcolm McLaren's boutique, and despite his shoplifting tendencies, the two would become friends. Malcolm became the manager of the Strand, but not without making some major executive decisions to reshape it. Other than changing the name, he also kicked out the bass player Wally Nightingale purely because he wore glasses which did not fit into the look Malcolm had envisioned for the band. This betrayal would haunt Wally for years to come, especially considering the eventual success of the band. Unfortunately for him, this was a pre-Weezer era, so being a specky four-eyed neek wasn't considered to be cool yet. Malcolm replaced Wally with one of the employees at Sex called Glenn Matlock, who later on would be replaced by Sid Vicious. During the hunt for a frontman, Malcolm auditioned a customer in the shop who wasn't very good at singing, but he had presence and looked the part, which was Malcolm's priority. The customer's name was John Lydon, and he became a singer of the Sex Pistols and was nicknamed Johnny Rotten due to his decaying teeth. The Sex Pistols would always wear Vivian's designs for shows and other public appearances, and just as Malcolm planned, this resulted in a lot of good business for Sex, but also the band went on to be one of the most influential music acts to come out of the UK in the 70s and essentially spearheaded the UK punk scene that appeared like an avalanche following their rise to fame. Despite their impact, the Sex Pistols did not last long and had broken up by 1978. Following this, Malcolm and Vivian decided to rename the boutique once more to World's End and focus more on making Vivian an established designer. This is when we saw her first runway collection, which was shown in London in 1981 called Pirate, and as expected had a pirate theme. Other than referencing historic clothes, this very flamboyant collection also drew inspiration from the New Romantics post-punk fashion and music scene that was gaining popularity at the time, with Vivian's clothes from this collection further pushing its reach. Adam Mant, who was a musician from the New Romantic scene, was also a past employee at the Sex Boutique. As Vivian further honed her craft as a designer and presented more clothes to the boutique, she started to rely on Malcolm less and less. Their relationship started to crumble in 1982, with Vivian saying he started to become very jealous and would refer to her as just a seamstress instead of a designer, along with trying to claim credit for her entire career. The couple parted ways, and the autumn-winter 1983 Witches Runway collection was their last official collaboration. Following the breakup, Vivian kept the shop but changed the label to her eponymous brand, Vivian Westwood. Despite stating that for a long time she felt like just an interpreter of Malcolm's ideas, she would further gain notoriety as a designer and even received an invitation to show her Spring-Summer 1984 Hypnose collection in Japan at Hane Mori's Best of 5 Global Fashion Awards. This continued into the 90s when she won the Women's Wear Designer of the Year award from the British Fashion Council in both 1990 and 1991. To cut a long story short, Vivian Westwood went on to become a household name and one of the greatest designers to come out of the UK. Despite some of her most iconic work criticising the monarchy, she would go on to accept an OBE award in 1992. For my non-British viewers who likely don't know what this is, it's essentially a pat on the back from the...
É basicamente assim, como pode falar, o pingente que indica que você é a porra de poser, caralho.
Reptile family who live here. During the ceremony, she famously did a twirl for the press to show off her outfit and accidentally flashed the...
Espetáculo que realmente importa.
The photographers. Yeah, apparently wearing underwear is not a part of the dress code for these sorts of events. She has actually been fined for indecent exhibition, but that was back in 1975 alongside Malcolm McLaren due to some of the explicit designs being sold in the sex boutique. Fortunately for Vivian, there was no repercussion for her blunder, and apparently the Queen even found it amusing, but I guess she was notorious for turning a blind eye to freaky behaviour. Luckily, Vivian didn't make the same mistake in 2006 when her OBE was advanced to Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, otherwise known as Damehood. While the Vivian Westwood brand is British through and through, it's also managed to find a second home in a different island nation on the other side of the world. Japan was the first country to receive a Vivian Westwood boutique outside of the UK. This happened during the 80s in Tokyo. While the country is famous for conformity, with the phrase, "the nail that sticks out gets hammered down," being almost a slogan for the nation, the Japanese youth at the time latched onto the punk aesthetic. Vivian's influence and presence in Japanese fashion becomes extremely apparent when you look into the Harajuku style of the 90s and noughties. Luckily, this street style era has been immortalized by Fruits magazine. If you're watching this video, you likely already know the significance of the Harajuku style, but for the people who don't, it's considered to be street fashion styling at its most creative and self-expressive, and is often brought up as evidence of the claim that Tokyo is the fashion capital of the world and does it better than everywhere else. This is a statement I definitely agree with, but Paris, Milan, New York, Copenhagen and London are often debated in this conversation too. I'm not going to get sidetracked and start debating and critiquing the fashion game of all these cities, as most of them I haven't even lived in, let alone visited, but for London, come on now. Until I'm getting mugged or my phone snatched by someone dressed like this instead of this, London's not even in the conversation. Anyway, the Harajuku style ethos is very similar to punk in the way that it was very much about non-conformity and self-expression, which I guess was already on the rise due to the breakthrough of Japanese anti-fashion titans such as Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto in the 80s. So maybe Japan's fashion landscape was just in the right conditions around the 80s and 90s, where subversive designs and non-conformity sentiments led to punk aesthetics and values becoming popular. This could explain why Vivian Westwood's designs were heavily favoured, as she was quite literally the pioneer of the most popular and iconic version of punk via the Sex Pistols. Speaking of the Sex Pistols, let's talk about a Japanese tribute band, as that will weirdly bring us to the next section of the video. Sometime in the late 80s, the Tokyo Sex Pistols was formed by a group of Bunker University fashion students who were really into Vivian Westwood and collecting her clothes. The band members changed over the years, and the involvement of certain members is sort of debated, but supposedly the key people involved were Hikaru Iwanaga, Hiroshi Fujiwara, Tomoaki Nagao, who also goes by the nickname Nigo, and of course Jun Takahashi. As you can see, this tribute band had quite the lineup of individuals who each would probably deserve their own video, but for now, let's focus on the frontman and founder of the band, Jun Takahashi. During his early teens, Jun was exposed to the UK punk scene, likely through music and magazines. This sparked an obsession with the Sex Pistols and Vivienne Westwood, which would later result in the formation of the Tokyo Sex Pistols, and then in 2005, he and Hiroshi Fujiwara would even release a book that displays their personal collections of clothes designed by Vivienne Westwood during her and Malcolm McLaren's shop's Seditionaries era, which was at the height of the Sex Pistols. If you know anything about Jun Takahashi, you'll know that he loves to reference his interests within his work. Sometimes this is done in a copy and paste JPEG onto a garment type of way, and sometimes it's done more creatively. Either way, Jun doesn't need Pinterest to make his inspiration mood boards. He puts those motherfuckers straight on the runway. Punk, however, was not just an aesthetic for Jun. It fundamentally shaped his iconic brand Undercover. Its influence went beyond surface level references and played a crucial role in the formation of the brand's identity. For starters, the motto of the label is "We make noise, not clothes," which is a clear recontextualization of punk values for a fashion brand. Jun isn't interested in making conventional clothes. Not only is he willing to incorporate subversive themes and references that wouldn't normally be presented in the context of high fashion, but he also likes to make statements with his clothes, and political satire can also be seen within his work. For example, he came up with the slogan "Generation Fuck You" for his Spring-Summer 2000 Undercover collection to critique the economic stagnation that Japan faced during the 90s. This can be at least partly attributed to the slow and inadequate intervention by the Japanese government after the generation prior enjoyed an economic boom which eventually led to an asset bubble bursting. Jun's willingness to take risks with his designs led to Rei Kawakubo saying he was the only one with courage. As he started making a name for himself in the 90s, the mastermind behind Comme des Garçons noticed his work and the two became acquainted. This eventually led to Rei supporting Jun and not only encouraging him but also helping him with his first collection shown outside of Japan. For Spring-Summer 2003, Jun Takahashi debuted his first Paris runway collection, Scab, which to this day is still considered to be one of Undercover's best and most iconic collections. This is also one of the quintessential examples of punk being displayed on high fashion runways. Jun's main inspiration and reference for this show was the crust punk subculture. This branch of punk is famous for its DIY fashion with a heavy focus on sewn-on patches. Jun took this look of super distressed and DIY punk fashion and paired it with sharp
and make it fucking poser shit
and other elements of high fashion craftsmanship, which was groundbreaking for the Western fashion scene at the time. The show wasn't limited to just referencing the aesthetics of punk, as Jun wanted to include some form of authentic rebellion. This came in the form of the show's finale, which saw a line of models walking in burqas. Obviously, using religious clothing like this is going to be and should be controversial without good reason. However, this seemed to be received positively, at least by the press at the time and retrospective articles, as it was viewed as a critique of the Bush administration's war on terrorism and the subsequent Islamophobia that erupted in the West after 9/11. Here's what US Vogue fashion critic Sarah Moa had to say about this. "I saw Undercover's first show in Paris in 2002 and I will never forget the feeling of what it was like to see burqas as a finale. It was just after 9/11 and you have to remember how we were all scared stiff, depressed, sorrowing, and in fashion circles not talking
Eu
about
já
it."
vou. Ó. O que tá pegando aqui? Sei lá o que tá pegando aí.
Vamos almoçar?
Eu já vou.
So when those multicolored burqas appeared, it was a complete and utter surprise. Here was a new young designer from Japan, unknown in the West, who was brave enough to be hinting at a subject no one else dared to look at. It didn't feel like he was trying to court controversy or be shocking for the sake of it though. There was something just coming from a completely fresh, non-aggressive viewpoint. There was something gentle, something odd and mysterious about it. While researching the specific subject, I noticed most modern articles talking about the scab burqas would say Jun intended to directly address 9/11, the military action following, and Islamophobia with these garments, but these explanations seemed suspiciously too Western to me. No shade to June, he's obviously a very cultured man, but as I dug a bit deeper, it started to seem like these were more likely interpretations like that of Sarah Moa that over time became viewed as June's intentions. There are very few documented conversations with June where he directly addresses his use of the burqas, which, as you'll see shortly, are somewhat vague and a bit contradictory, but this is what I could find. Firstly, there is the 2002 issue of Relax magazine, which includes an interview with June regarding his 2003 scab collection. Bear in mind that this interview is in Japanese, so I had to use Google Translate, which isn't always the most reliable. I don't think religions or races or anything like that are an issue at all, and I think that women who wear those kinds of costumes can't show their faces in public, so it's completely gender discrimination. This points towards the use of burqas potentially being a critique of Islam by June.
What does it take to lead in a world that never stands still? Not just to lead people.
The use of burqas in scab was also discussed by Ellen McClarney in her academic journal article, The Burqa in Vogue, Fashioning Afghanistan, which was published in the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies in 2009. She states, when quizzed on his motives, Takahashi has little to say. Many critics try to attribute a political message to his work, and then refers to Takahashi's curated issue of A magazine where he is interviewed about the subject. A quick side note, McClarney claims the interviewer was Terry Jones, the British comedian of the Monty Python troupe. She states this is important as he was known for critiquing the Bush administration and the war in the Middle East. However, Etienne, who runs my clothing archive, pointed out to me that it could have actually been Terry Jones, the founder of ID magazine, which would make far more sense, especially as he authored a book titled 100 Contemporary Fashion Designers, which features Jun Takahashi. But yeah, I don't have access to this issue of A magazine other than what's referenced in the academic journal, so if anyone watching this video does, it would be great if you could confirm which Terry Jones it is in the comments, please. But anyway, in this interview, the mysterious Terry Jones asked him if the burqas were connected to post 9/11 sentiments and how it looked like a political comment, to which Jun replies by saying, "It might have looked like I was showing my political message, but that wasn't my intention." It's unclear if he's saying that specifically the post 9/11 political message wasn't his intended message, or he's saying that there wasn't a political message behind it at all. However, in ID magazine issue 229, in an interview with Nicole Full, June said regarding the burqas, "I wanted to mix cultural and ethnic stuff to make humans equal for once. I tried to rid the mentality of thoughts of war, so I made an anti-war collection." In McClarney's journal article, she suggests that June used the burqas as a punk symbol, saying, "Takahashi undermines the media's incessant connection of the burqa with repression and instead identifies it with punk rebellion against middle-class values," and goes on to draw parallels between the commodification and subsequent devaluing of punk and burqas, but again, this is just another wishy-washy interpretation. I'm aware it seems hilarious that a YouTuber like myself would even attempt to critique an academic journal, but McClarney's questionable identification of Terry Jones, combined with the lack of reference to the Relax magazine interview, where June states he believes that burqas represent gender discrimination, leaves me unconvinced with the idea that the burqas were used in the way she claims in her writing. Again, there might be some nuance or meaning lost during the translation of the Relax magazine interview, so take all of this with a grain of salt. On one hand, June stated the use of burqas was an anti-war statement, which given the time period would definitely be a response to George Bush's war on terror. Still,
eu já vou, caramba!